When Rebecca Chen bought the house at 1247 Maple Drive, the realtor mentioned the property next door only once. "The Harpers lived there," she said, her voice dropping. "Nice couple. They disappeared 10 years ago. House has been empty ever since." Rebecca thought nothing of it, until 3 months after moving in at exactly 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday night, someone knocked on her door. She looked through the peephole and saw them standing there smiling. The same couple from the missing persons posters, still taped to telephone poles around the neighborhood. Michael and Elizabeth Harper. They looked exactly the same as they did in those decade-old photographs. Not a day older, not a single grey hair. And they were holding a casserole dish, as if they'd just come to welcome her to the neighborhood. "Hi there," Michael said when Rebecca opened the door, her hand shaking on the doorknob. "We're your neighbors from next door. We wanted to welcome you to Maple Drive." His smile was too wide, too perfect. Elizabeth stood beside him, that same frozen smile on her face, holding the casserole with both hands. Neither of them blinked. Neither of them seemed to breathe. And when Rebecca looked down, she noticed, "Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because the ending of this story will shake you in ways you never imagined. And tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this story?" Rebecca Chen had been searching for the perfect house for 8 months. At 32 years old, she'd finally saved enough for a down payment, finally felt stable enough in her career as a graphic designer to commit to a mortgage. The house at 1247 Maple Drive appeared in her search results on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March, and something about it immediately felt right. The house was a modest 2-story colonial built in the 1970s, with white siding, black shutters, and a small front porch perfect for morning coffee. The price was surprisingly reasonable for the neighborhood, a quiet, tree-lined street in the suburbs of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, known for its good schools and low crime rates, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Diane Morrison, met Rebecca at the property on a Thursday afternoon. The March sun filtered through bare tree branches, casting long shadows across the lawn that needed mowing. The house had been on the market for 3 weeks, Diane explained, which was unusual for this neighborhood. Usually properties here sold within days. "The previous owner passed away," Diane said as she unlocked the front door. "Estate sale. The family is motivated to sell quickly." She didn't mention that the previous owner, an elderly woman named Martha Brennan, had lived alone for 40 years and had died in her sleep at 93. She didn't mention that Martha had been the street's unofficial historian, the person everyone came to when they wanted to know about the neighborhood's past. The house was everything Rebecca wanted: hardwood floors, updated kitchen, a small backyard with mature trees. The master bedroom had large windows that looked out over Maple Drive, offering a view of the quiet street and the neighboring houses. It was during the walkthrough that Rebecca first noticed the house next door. 1249. Maple Drive stood dark and silent beside her potential new home. The grass was overgrown, nearly knee-high in places. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. The paint was peeling, and several shutters hung at odd angles. A real estate sign stood in the front yard, so faded by sun and weather that the text was barely readable. The whole property had an air of abandonment, of something left behind and forgotten. "What's the story with that place?" Rebecca asked, nodding toward the neighboring house. Diane's smile faltered for just a moment. "The Harpers lived there. Nice couple, from what I understand. They disappeared about 10 years ago, just vanished one night. House has been empty ever since." She said it casually, as if discussing nothing more unusual than a property that needed new gutters. "Disappeared," Rebecca pressed. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "It was a whole thing," Diane said, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "Police investigated, FBI got involved, never found any trace of them. Eventually it became a cold case. The house went into probate, but no one's bought it. Most people find it—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Unsettling." Rebecca looked at the abandoned house more carefully. Even in the afternoon sunlight, it seemed to radiate a kind of darkness. The windows looked like empty eye sockets. The overgrown lawn gave it a wild, untamed appearance. But Rebecca wasn't superstitious. An unsolved disappearance next door didn't bother her. If anything, it probably contributed to the lower price of $12.47. "Does it affect the property value?" she asked practically. Diane seemed relieved to return to business. "Well, it hasn't helped, but the house you're looking at is solid. Good bones, good neighborhood despite of that." She gestured vaguely at the Harper house without looking at it directly. Rebecca made an offer that afternoon. It was accepted the next day. 30 days later, she owned 1247 Maple Drive. Moving day was a blur of boxes and furniture and helpful friends. Rebecca's best friend, Maya, flew in from Chicago to help her unpack and organize. They worked long into the night, assembling furniture and hanging pictures, turning the empty house into a home. It was Maya who first mentioned feeling watched. "Does that house next door give you the creeps?" she asked as they took a break on the front porch, drinking wine from coffee mugs because the wine glasses were still packed somewhere. The sun had set, and Maple Drive was quiet, except for the sound of crickets and the distant bark of a dog. Rebecca glanced at the Harper house. In the darkness, it looked even more abandoned. The overgrown grass rustled in the evening breeze. The dark windows seemed to stare back at them. "A little," Rebecca admitted, "but it's just an empty house." "I keep feeling like someone's watching from those windows," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper even though they were alone. "Like there's someone standing in the dark, looking out at us." Rebecca laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "You've been watching too many horror movies. It's just empty. Has been for 10 years. But that night, alone in her new bedroom, Rebecca found herself looking out the window at the house next door. Maya's words echoed in her mind. The Harper house was completely dark, no lights anywhere. Yet Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something was different, that the darkness inside those windows wasn't just the absence of light, but something more, something watching. She closed the curtains and went to sleep, telling herself she was being ridiculous. The first few weeks in the new house were good. Rebecca settled into a routine, working from her home office during the day, exploring the neighborhood in the evenings. Her neighbors were friendly but reserved, pleasant waves and brief conversations, but nothing deep. The kind of neighborly interaction that felt comfortable without being intrusive. She met the Johnsons across the street, a retired couple in their 70s. Tom and Barbara had lived on Maple Drive for 45 years and knew everyone. They brought over a welcome basket filled with homemade cookies and local restaurant recommendations. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Barbara said warmly, then hesitated. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but Diane told you about the house next door, didn't she?" "The Harpers," Rebecca confirmed. "She mentioned they disappeared." Tom and Barbara exchanged a look that Rebecca couldn't quite read. "It was terrible," Tom said quietly. "Just terrible. Michael and Elizabeth were good people. We'd known them for years. And then one night, they were just gone." "What happened?" Rebecca asked, curiosity overcoming politeness. Barbara glanced at the Harper house, her expression troubled. "No one knows. That's what makes it so disturbing. They were home that evening. We saw lights on, saw them moving around inside. Everything seemed normal, but the next morning their car was still in the driveway, the door was unlocked and they were gone. Coffee still warm on the counter, TV still on, like they just stepped out for a moment and never came back. Police thought maybe it was foul play," Tom continued, "but there was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no forced entry, nothing stolen. It was like they'd vanished into thin air." "Did they have any enemies?" Rebecca asked. "Anyone who might have wanted to hurt them?" "That's just it," Barbara said. "They were the nicest people you'd ever meet. Michael was a high school teacher. Elizabeth worked at the library. They'd been married for 15 years, no kids. Everyone in the neighborhood loved them. There was absolutely no reason for them to disappear and no reason for anyone to harm them." Tom leaned in closer, his voice dropping. The strangest part was the timeline. Multiple neighbors saw them that evening around 8 or 9 p.m. Everything seemed normal. But sometime between 9 p.m. and midnight, they vanished. And I mean vanished. The FBI searched that house top to bottom, brought in dogs, forensic teams, the works, found absolutely nothing. "Has anyone tried to sell the house?" Rebecca asked. "The bank owns it now. Barbara explained. "It's been on the market for years, but no one wants to buy it. Even with the price dropping lower and lower, there's just something wrong about it. Some houses, when people leave, they're just empty. But that house, it feels different, like whatever happened there left something behind." Rebecca thanked them for the cookies and the information, but their words stayed with her. That night she found herself researching the Harper disappearance online. There were dozens of articles, forum posts, even a podcast episode dedicated to the mystery. The basic facts were consistent across all sources. Michael Harper, 38, high school history teacher. Elizabeth Harper, 36, librarian. Married 15 years. No children. No financial problems. No marital issues. No signs of mental health crises. On the evening of April 15th, 10 years ago, they were seen by multiple neighbors going about their normal evening routine. By morning, they were gone. The investigation found no clues, no evidence, no explanation. One detail caught Rebecca's attention. Several neighbors reported seeing lights in the Harper house for several nights after the disappearance. Strange lights, moving from room to room at odd hours. But when police checked, the house was empty and the electricity had been shut off. The lights were dismissed as reflections or the imaginations of spooked neighbors. Rebecca closed her laptop and looked out her bedroom window at the dark house next door. Empty for 10 years. Waiting, watching. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Houses didn't watch. They were just structures of wood and nails and glass. But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something in that house was aware of her, that something knew she was there. A month passed. Rebecca settled into her new life, making friends with more neighbors, establishing routines. She started dating a guy named David she'd met at a coffee shop. Work was going well. The house felt more like home with each passing day. But the Harper house continued to bother her. Not because anything happened, nothing did. It just sat there dark and silent. But Rebecca found herself looking at it constantly, from her bedroom window, from the front porch, while working in her office. Her eyes were drawn to it like a magnet, pulled toward those empty windows and overgrown lawn. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she thought she saw movement in those dark windows. Just a flicker, a shadow, something shifting in the darkness inside. She'd blink and it would be gone, and she'd tell herself it was just her imagination, just tricks of light and shadow. Maya visited again in late June, and Rebecca found herself grateful for the company. They spent the weekend barbecuing in the backyard, drinking wine on the porch, catching up on 3 months of life. But Maya noticed immediately how often Rebecca's gaze drifted to the house next door. "You're obsessed with that place," Maya observed on Saturday night as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "I'm not obsessed," Rebecca protested. "It's just there. I can't help but notice it. Have you been inside?" "What? No, it's not my property." "Maybe you should," Maya suggested. "Maybe if you saw that it's just an empty house, it wouldn't bother you so much." Rebecca considered this. That would be trespassing. The realtor could probably show it to you. It's for sale, right? You could pretend you're interested in buying it as an investment property. The idea took root in Rebecca's mind. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe actually seeing the inside of the house would demystify it, would turn it from an object of obsession into just another empty property. She decided to call Diane on Monday. But Sunday night, something happened that changed everything. Rebecca was in bed, reading a book, when she heard it. A sound from outside, soft but distinct, footsteps on gravel. She froze, listening. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, crunching on the driveway beside her house. She got up quietly and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The street was dark except for the pools of light from street lamps. Her driveway was empty, but next door, in front of the Harper house, she saw something that made her heart stop. 2 figures stood in the overgrown front yard. Even in the darkness, she could make out their shapes. A man and a woman standing completely still, facing her house, facing her window. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She ducked away from the window, her heart pounding. When she gathered the courage to look again, the figures were gone. The Harper yard was empty. She told herself it was teenagers, kids exploring the abandoned house, or maybe just shadows that looked like people, her mind playing tricks. But deep down, she knew what she'd seen. Two people standing in that yard watching her house in the middle of the night. Rebecca barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. When morning finally came, she was exhausted, but also relieved. Daylight made the fears of the night seem foolish, but when she looked out her window at the Harper house, she saw something that hadn't been there before. Footprints in the overgrown grass. Two sets of footprints leading from the street to the middle of the yard, then stopping, just stopping. Not leading back to the street or to the house, just ending, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. Rebecca called the police. They sent an officer who took a report, looked at the footprints and suggested it was probably kids. He recommended she install security cameras if she was worried. He didn't seem concerned. Just another call about the weird house where those people disappeared years ago. But Rebecca was concerned. Very concerned. That afternoon she ordered a complete security camera system online. Professional grade, night vision, motion detection. It would arrive in 3 days. Until then, she'd just have to be careful, be aware, pay attention. That night, she made sure every door and window was locked. She kept lights on throughout the house. And she tried not to look out the window at the house next door, at those dark windows that seemed to stare back at her like empty eyes. 3 months after moving in, on a Tuesday night in late August, Rebecca's life changed forever. She was watching TV, a mindless sitcom that didn't require much attention. The security cameras she'd installed a week earlier gave her peace of mind. She could check them from her phone any time, see every angle of her property. Nothing would surprise her now. At 11:34 p.m. her doorbell rang. Rebecca jumped, her heart immediately racing. Who would come to her door at this hour? She grabbed her phone, pulled up the security camera app, and looked at the feed from her front door camera. 2 people stood on her porch, a man and a woman, both smiling pleasantly. The man wore khaki pants and a polo shirt. The woman wore a sundress despite the cool evening. And they were holding something, a casserole dish covered with aluminum foil. They looked familiar, very familiar. Rebecca's mind raced, trying to place them, and then, with a jolt of pure horror, she realized where she'd seen those faces before. The missing persons posters, the newspaper articles, the photographs in the online reports about the disappearance. Michael and Elizabeth Harper stood on her front porch, looking exactly as they had 10 years ago, not aged a single day. Smiling those same smiles from their wedding photo that had been reproduced in dozens of news articles about their disappearance. The doorbell rang again. Rebecca's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone. This wasn't possible. They'd been missing for 10 years. They couldn't just show up at her door holding a casserole like nothing had happened. This had to be some kind of prank, some sick joke. But the camera didn't lie. There they were, clear as day in the infrared light of her security system. Michael and Elizabeth Harper, missing since April 15th, 10 years ago, standing on her porch, waiting to be let in. Rebecca stood frozen in her living room, staring at her phone screen. The security camera feed showed the couple still standing on her porch, patient and smiling. Michael raised his hand and knocked, this time, 3 gentle raps on the door. The sound echoed through Rebecca's house, making her flinch. Her rational mind tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Maybe these weren't actually the Harpers. Maybe they just looked similar. After all, she'd only seen old photographs. Or maybe this was some elaborate prank. Actors hired to mess with her, someone who knew she'd been researching the disappearance. But even as she thought this, she knew it wasn't true. The resemblance was too perfect, too exact. Every detail matched the photographs she'd studied obsessively over the past months. Rebecca's finger hovered over the phone screen. She should call 911. That's what any reasonable person would do. But what would she say? The couple who disappeared 10 years ago is at my door. They'd think she was crazy. Hell, she was starting to think she was crazy. Through the door, she heard Michael's voice, muffled but friendly. Hello? We know you're home. We just wanted to introduce ourselves. We're your neighbors from next door. Elizabeth's voice joined his, high and sweet. "We brought you a casserole. It's still warm. We thought you might be hungry." Rebecca's throat was dry. She licked her lips and managed to croak out, "Who are you?" A pause. Then Michael's voice again, still friendly but with a hint of confusion. "We're Michael and Elizabeth Harper. We live at 1249 Maple Drive, right next door to you. We wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "You've been missing for 10 years, Rebecca said, her voice stronger now. "The police have been looking for you." Another pause, longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his voice had changed. Still friendly, but with something underneath. Something wrong. "Missing? No, we've been right here, right next door. We've always been here." Rebecca looked at her phone again. On the camera feed, the couple continued smiling, but something about their faces seemed off now that she was really looking. The smiles were too wide, too fixed, like masks. And their eyes, even through the grainy security camera footage, there was something wrong with their eyes. They didn't blink. They just stared at the camera, unmoving, those impossible smiles frozen on their faces. "I'm calling the police," Rebecca said. "Why would you do that?" Elizabeth asked, her voice still sweet but with a sharp edge underneath. "We're just being neighborly." "Don't you want to be neighborly, Rebecca?" The sound of her name in Elizabeth's mouth made Rebecca's blood run cold. She hadn't told them her name. She hadn't told anyone her name through the door. How did they know? "How do you know my name?" Rebecca demanded. "We're neighbors," Michael said simply. "Neighbors know each other. That's what makes a neighborhood special. Everyone looking out for everyone else. Everyone knowing everyone else's business." Rebecca backed away from the door. On her phone, she pulled up her contact list with shaking fingers, scrolling for 911. But before she could dial, Elizabeth spoke again. "We know you've been watching our house, Rebecca. We've seen you, looking out your window, staring at our home, wondering about us. Well, now we're here. Now you can stop wondering." "I'm calling the police right now," Rebecca said, her finger hovering over the call button. "The police can't help you," Michael said, and his voice was different now, colder, flatter. "They couldn't help us. They won't be able to help you either." Rebecca pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, but instead of the 911 operator answering, the line went dead. Rebecca looked at her phone in disbelief. No signal. But that was impossible. She had full bars just a moment ago. She tried again. The same thing happened. Ring, ring, deadline. "You should open the door, Rebecca," Elizabeth said. Her voice drifted through the wood like smoke. "We came all this way to welcome you. It would be rude to make us stand out here all night." "Go away," Rebecca said, hating how her voice shook. "Leave me alone or I'm calling the police." "You already tried that," Michael pointed out. "It didn't work, did it?" Rebecca ran to the back door, thinking she could escape, run to the Johnsons' house across the street, get help. But when she looked through the kitchen window, she froze. Michael and Elizabeth Harper stood in her backyard, still holding the casserole dish, still smiling. But that was impossible. They'd just been at her front door seconds ago. There was no way they could have gotten to the backyard that fast. She looked at her phone again, pulling up the security camera feed. The front porch camera showed the couple still standing at her front door. The backyard camera showed them standing by her patio. 2 different angles, 2 different locations, the same 2 people in 2 places at once. Rebecca's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be happening. This violated every law of physics, every rule of reality. People couldn't be in 2 places at once. People who'd been missing for 10 years couldn't show up looking exactly the same as they had the day they disappeared. Unless they weren't people at all. The thought came unbidden and Rebecca tried to push it away. But it persisted. What if whatever was at her door, whatever was in her yard, wasn't actually Michael and Elizabeth Harper? What if it was something else? Something that had taken their faces, their forms, and was using them for its own purposes. She thought about the lights neighbors had reported seeing in the Harper house after the couple disappeared, the feeling of being watched she'd experienced ever since moving in, the footprints in the yard that led nowhere, and now this, impossible visitors who couldn't possibly be who they claimed to be. "Rebecca," Elizabeth's voice called from the front door, but at the same time, from the backyard, Michael's voice, "Rebecca, open the door, let us in. We just want to talk." Two voices, saying different things, from two different directions, but both in perfect sync somehow, like they were connected by an invisible thread. Rebecca backed into the corner of her kitchen, her mind racing. She needed help. She needed to get out. But every exit was blocked by these things, whatever they were. Her landline. She still had a landline for emergencies, a quaint holdover from her grandmother's advice. She ran to the phone in the hallway and picked it up. Dial tone. Thank God. She dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There are people trying to break into my house, Rebecca said quickly. 1247 Maple Drive. Please send help right away. Are they armed? Are you in immediate danger? I don't know. They're at my front and back door. They won't leave. She stopped, realizing how crazy the truth would sound. Please, just send someone. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Are you somewhere safe in the house? I'm in the hallway. I can see both doors from here. Good. Keep watching them. Don't open the doors. The police will be there in approximately 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Rebecca could survive 5 minutes. She kept the phone pressed to her ear, her eyes darting between the front door and the kitchen, where she could see the back door. On her cell phone, the security cameras showed the Harpers still at both doors, still smiling, still waiting. Then, simultaneously, both figures turned their heads to look directly at the cameras. Despite being in different locations, their movements were perfectly synchronized. And they weren't smiling anymore. We know you called them, Michael's voice said from the front door. It won't matter, Elizabeth's voice said from the back. They won't see us, Michael said. But we'll still be here, Elizabeth said. Watching, they said in unison from two different locations, their voices blending into one horrible harmony. Rebecca heard sirens in the distance getting closer. Help was coming. She just had to hold on. The figures at both doors turned away from the cameras and walked out of frame. Rebecca watched her phone screen intensely. Where did they go? The cameras showed empty porches, empty yard. They'd simply walked away. The sirens got louder, and then police cars pulled up in front of her house, lights flashing. Rebecca sagged with relief. She was safe. Whatever those things were, they were gone now. 2 officers approached her front door. Rebecca watched through the peephole as they climbed her porch steps. One of them knocked. Police. We received a 911 call from this address. Rebecca opened the door immediately. Thank God you're here. There were 2 people trying to get in. They wouldn't leave. They were at both my front and back doors at the same time. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, can we come in and look around? Yes, please. Rebecca stepped aside, letting them enter. The officers did a thorough check of the house and the property. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the yard besides the old ones from days ago, no evidence anyone had been there. Are you sure you saw people? The male officer asked gently. Sometimes shadows can look. I have security cameras, Rebecca interrupted. I can show you the footage. She pulled up the recordings on her phone. But when she played back the video from 11:34 p.m., her porch was empty. The backyard was empty. There was no one there. The timestamp was correct. The cameras had clearly been recording, but the Harpers, or whatever they were, simply weren't there. I don't understand, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. They were right there. I saw them. I talked to them through the door. The female officer's expression softened with sympathy. Have you been under a lot of stress lately? Sometimes when we're anxious or exhausted, we can experience... I'm not crazy, Rebecca said firmly. They were here. Michael and Elizabeth Harper, the couple who disappeared 10 years ago. They were at my door. Both officers' expressions changed. You know about the Harpers? The male officer asked. Of course I know. I live next door to their house, and tonight they showed up at my door looking exactly like they did 10 years ago, holding a casserole dish, claiming they're my neighbors. The officers exchanged another look, this one more serious. Ma'am, the female officer said carefully, I was part of the original investigation into the Harper disappearance. I know this case inside and out. Those people are gone. Whatever you saw tonight, it wasn't them. I know it sounds insane, Rebecca said. I know it's impossible, but I saw them. They knew my name. They told me the police couldn't help me, that the police couldn't help them either. The male officer wrote something in his notebook. We'll include this in our report. In the meantime, I recommend you make sure all your doors and windows are secure. Maybe stay with a friend tonight if you're worried. They were humoring her. Rebecca could see it in their faces. They thought she was hysterical, paranoid, maybe mentally unwell. They'd file a report and forget about it by morning. After the police left, Rebecca sat in her living room with all the lights on, trying to process what had happened. She hadn't imagined it. She'd seen them, talked to them, heard their voices. But the cameras had recorded nothing. How was that possible? Unless whatever had come to her door existed outside normal reality. Unless it was something the cameras couldn't capture, something that existed in a space between what was and what shouldn't be. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch, checking the security cameras obsessively, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she felt relief wash over her. Whatever those things were, they seemed to be creatures of darkness. Maybe daylight would keep them away. She was wrong. Rebecca spent the next day exhausted and terrified, jumping at every sound, constantly checking her security cameras. She called Maya, but her friend was in meetings all day. She considered calling David, but they'd only been dating a few weeks. How could she possibly explain what had happened? He'd think she was insane. By mid-afternoon, Rebecca was starting to doubt her own sanity. Maybe the police were right. Maybe she'd been stressed and anxious and her mind had conjured the whole thing. Maybe she'd fallen asleep on the couch and dreamed it all. The security footage showed nothing after all. No evidence. Nothing to prove it had really happened. But deep down she knew the truth. Those things had been at her door. She hadn't imagined their voices, their faces, the way they'd known her name. Around 4 p.m., Rebecca heard a tentative knock on her door. She nearly jumped out of her skin, her heart immediately racing. She grabbed her phone, pulled up the security camera app with shaking hands. It was Barbara Johnson from across the street, holding a covered dish. Rebecca opened the door, trying to hide her relief and residual terror. "Hi, dear," Barbara said with a warm smile. "I made extra lasagna and thought you might like some. You look exhausted. Are you feeling all right?" Rebecca almost laughed. If only Barbara knew. "I had a rough night, but thank you, this is very sweet." "May I come in for a moment?" Barbara asked. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside. Barbara came in, looking around the house with the casual curiosity of a neighbor who's genuinely interested in how you've decorated. "Your home looks lovely," Barbara said. "You've done wonders with the place. Martha would be happy to see it lived in again." She set the lasagna on the kitchen counter, then turned to Rebecca with a more serious expression. "But that's not really why I'm here. Tom and I saw the police at your house last night, and this morning I ran into Officer Martinez at the grocery store. She mentioned you'd reported seeing the Harpers." Rebecca tensed. "She told you that?" "Small town, dear. Word gets around, especially when it involves that case." Barbara's voice was kind, not judgmental. "Officer Martinez is worried about you. She thinks the stress of living next to that house is getting to you. So you think I'm crazy too?" "No," Barbara said firmly. "I don't think you're crazy at all. In fact, I think you saw exactly what you say you saw." Rebecca stared at her. "What?" Barbara moved to the window, looking out at the Harper house. "I've lived on this street for 45 years. I've seen things that I can't explain. Things that don't make sense, and I'm not the only one." She turned back to Rebecca. "Has anyone told you what happened to Martha Brennan? The woman who used to live here. The realtor said she died in her sleep." "That's true. But did anyone tell you what she said the week before she died?" Barbara's expression was troubled. "She called me in a panic one night, said the Harpers had come to her door, said they were standing on her porch asking to come in. She was terrified, Rebecca. Absolutely terrified. We thought it was dementia. She was 93 after all. But now I'm not so sure." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "She saw them too." She claimed she did, multiple times in her final weeks, always at night. Always at her door. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom because she said she could see them standing in the yard, watching her window. Barbara's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "The night she died, Tom and I heard her screaming. By the time we got here, she was gone. Heart attack, the coroner said, but her eyes, Rebecca. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something, and she looked absolutely terrified. Rebecca felt sick. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Would you have bought the house if they had? Barbara asked gently. The realtor didn't have to disclose it. Martha died of natural causes, and we weren't sure what to think of her stories. Until last night, when Officer Martinez told me what you'd reported. The exact same thing Martha said. Michael and Elizabeth Harper at the door, asking to come in. What are they? Rebecca whispered. What's in that house? I don't know, Barbara admitted. But I don't think it's the Harpers. Not really. I think something happened in that house 10 years ago. Something that left an impression. An echo, maybe, or something worse. The police found nothing when the Harpers disappeared, Rebecca said. No evidence of foul play, no signs of a struggle. How could something that terrible happen without leaving a trace? Some things don't leave physical traces, Barbara said. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. Rebecca thought about the faces she'd seen, those frozen smiles, the way the figures had been in two places at once. They told me the police couldn't help, that they couldn't help the Harpers, and they couldn't help me. Barbara's face went pale. Martha said the same thing, the exact same words. The two women stood in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation hanging between them. Finally, Rebecca asked, what did Martha do? How did she protect herself? She didn't go out at night, kept all the lights on, put salt across her doorways. She was Irish, believed in the old protections. Barbara paused. But in the end, it didn't matter. They still got to her somehow. That's not reassuring, Rebecca said weakly. I know, I'm sorry. Barbara took Rebecca's hand. But you're not alone in this. Tom and I are right across the street. If you need anything, day or night, you call us. Don't try to handle this by yourself. After Barbara left, Rebecca stood at her window, staring at the Harper house in the fading afternoon light. The overgrown grass swayed in the breeze. The dark windows reflected the sky. It looked like any other abandoned house. But Rebecca knew better now. Something was in there. Something that had been waiting for 10 years. And now, it knew she was here. That night, Rebecca followed Barbara's advice. She left every light in the house on. She checked and double-checked every lock. She kept her phone charged and nearby. And she stayed awake, watching the security cameras, waiting. At 11:34 p.m., the exact same time as the night before, her doorbell rang. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She looked at her phone. The security cameras showed empty porches, empty yard, but the doorbell had definitely rung. She'd heard it clearly. Then came the knock. 3 gentle raps, just like before. Rebecca. Elizabeth's voice muffled through the door. We came back. We brought dessert this time. Chocolate cake, your favorite. How did they know chocolate was her favorite? Rebecca had never told anyone in the neighborhood that detail. Rebecca. Michael's voice now coming from the kitchen direction. Why won't you let us in? We're trying to be good neighbors. Don't you want to be part of the community? She pulled up the security cameras again. Still nothing. Empty porches, empty yard. But the voices continued, coming from multiple directions now. We know you talked to Barbara, Elizabeth said from the front door. She told you about Martha, Michael said from the back. Poor Martha, Elizabeth said, her voice taking on a mocking sympathy. She was so scared at the end, so terrified. But she let us in eventually. Everyone lets us in eventually. We just want to welcome you, Michael said, like proper neighbors. Let us in, Rebecca, they said in unison, voices blending impossibly. Let us in and we'll tell you what happened to the real Michael and Elizabeth. Would you like that? Would you like to know the truth? Rebecca grabbed her landline and dialed 911 again, but this time she got a busy signal. She tried again. Still busy. She tried her cell phone. No signal again, despite having full bars moments ago. The police can't help you, the voices reminded her, almost singing the words. We told you that already. Why don't you listen? Rebecca ran upstairs to her bedroom, the farthest point from both doors. She locked herself in and pushed her dresser against the door. Then she sat on her bed, hugging her knees, listening. The voices continued, but they were getting closer. moving through her house somehow, even though the doors were locked, even though no one had broken in. "We're in your living room now, Rebecca," Elizabeth's voice called up the stairs. "Nice pictures on the wall. Is that your family?" "Pretty house," Michael said. "We like what you've done with it, better than how Martha had it." Footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate footsteps climbing toward her bedroom. Rebecca grabbed her phone and tried calling Maya, David, anyone, but every call went dead immediately. She was completely cut off, completely alone. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They paused outside her bedroom door. "Rebecca," Elizabeth's voice was right outside now. "We just want to talk. We have so much to tell you about the neighborhood, about your house, about what happened here before." "This house has history," Michael added. "Dark history. Would you like to hear about it?" The doorknob started to turn, even though Rebecca had locked it. The dresser she'd pushed against the door began to slide across the floor, moving by itself, scraping loudly against the hardwood. Rebecca screamed. And then, suddenly, silence. The doorknob stopped turning. The dresser stopped moving. The voices ceased. Rebecca sat frozen, listening. Nothing. Complete silence. She waited for 5 minutes, 10, 15. Still nothing. Finally, she gathered her courage and checked her phone. The security cameras showed nothing unusual, just her dark, quiet house. She pulled the dresser away from the door and slowly opened it, peering into the hallway. Empty. No one there. She crept downstairs, checking every room. The house was exactly as she'd left it, doors still locked, windows secure, no signs that anyone had been inside. But Rebecca knew what she'd heard. Those voices had been in her house. Those footsteps had climbed her stairs. Whatever these things were, they could bypass physical barriers. Locks and doors meant nothing to them. She spent the rest of the night in her car, parked in front of the Johnsons' house, watching her home from a distance. She didn't sleep. She just watched and waited for dawn. The next morning, exhausted and desperate, Rebecca went to the public library. If these things were connected to her house's history, she needed to know everything. Barbara had mentioned dark history. It was time to find out exactly what that meant. The Lancaster Public Library was a beautiful old building downtown, all tall windows and mahogany shelves. Rebecca found the local history section and started pulling books about the neighborhood. But it was the newspaper archives that proved most valuable. The librarian, a woman in her 60s named Helen, helped Rebecca navigate the microfiche machine. "What are you researching?" Helen asked pleasantly. "The history of Maple Drive," Rebecca said, "specifically 1247. Helen's pleasant expression faltered slightly. "That's Martha Brennan's old house. Are you the new owner?" "I am. Do you know something about the property?" Helen hesitated, then sat down beside Rebecca. "I knew Martha. She was a regular here for years, always researching local history. Wonderful woman. Very sharp right up until the end." She paused. "Well, almost until the end." "What happened at the end?" "In her final weeks, she became obsessed. She'd come in every day, going through old newspapers, old records, looking for something. She seemed frightened, though she wouldn't say why. The last time I saw her, about a week before she died, she told me something strange." Rebecca leaned forward. "What did she say?" "She said, 'The house remembers. They all remember. That's why they can't leave.' I thought it was just age catching up with her. But now with you here asking about the house's history." Helen trailed off. "Let me show you something." Helen led Rebecca to a locked cabinet in the back of the library. She pulled out several manila folders, old and worn. "These are Martha's research files. After she died, her family donated them to the library. Most of it is just local history, but there's one file that seemed to disturb the family. They almost didn't include it." She handed Rebecca a folder labeled 1247 Maple Drive, Full History. Rebecca opened it and started reading. What she found made her blood run cold. The house at 1247 Maple Drive was built in 1972 by a developer named Richard Vance. He and his wife Catherine moved in as the first residents. They seemed happy at first, but neighbors reported increasingly strange behavior. Catherine told people she heard voices in the house, voices of people who weren't there, having conversations she couldn't quite make out. In 1975, Catherine Vance hung herself in the master bedroom. the same bedroom Rebecca now slept in. Richard sold the house immediately and moved away. The next family, the Kowalskis, lasted only 2 years. The mother, Anna, reported the same phenomenon. Voices in the house, conversations she couldn't understand. She also reported seeing figures in the windows of the Harper house next door, even though that house wasn't built yet. How could she see figures in a house that didn't exist? The Kowalskis moved out suddenly in 1977. The house sat empty for a year before the next family moved in. Rebecca flipped through page after page of Martha's meticulous research. Family after family had lived in 1247 Maple Drive. Most stayed less than 5 years. All reported similar experiences. Voices, figures, a sense of being watched. Several mentioned the house next door, 1249, even in the years before it was built. They described seeing lights in windows that didn't exist yet, hearing sounds from a structure that hadn't been constructed. It was as if 1249 Maple Drive had always existed, even when it physically hadn't. Then she found the entry that made everything click into place. In 1985, before either house existed in its current form, the entire lot had been a different property, a boarding house run by a woman named Eleanor Hartwell. On April 15, 1975, exactly 10 years before the Harpers disappeared on the same date, something terrible happened. 2 boarders, Michael and Elizabeth Harper, disappeared from Eleanor's boarding house. They vanished from their room overnight. Police investigated but found no evidence of foul play. The case went cold. Eleanor Hartwell committed suicide a month later, leaving a note that said only, "They're still here. They'll always be here. I can hear them in the walls." Rebecca's hands shook as she read, Michael and Elizabeth Harper, the same names, missing on the same date, 35 years apart. But how was that possible? She kept reading. The boarding house was demolished in 1986. The lot was split, and 2 new houses were built, 1247 and 1249 Maple Drive, the houses that stand there today. But according to Martha's research, the disappearances didn't stop. Throughout the years, people living in both houses reported seeing the Harpers. Always the same description, a man and woman in their 30s smiling, holding a casserole dish or some other welcoming gift. They'd appear at doors, at windows, in hallways. Sometimes both residents of 1247 and 1249 would see them on the same night. And every 10 years on April 15th, something terrible happened. Someone died or disappeared. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. 1975. Original Michael and Elizabeth Harper disappear from the boarding house. 1985. Eleanor Hartwell commits suicide. 1995. Thomas Chen, who lived in 1247, dies of a heart attack. He'd been telling neighbors about seeing the Harpers at his door. 2005. The modern Michael and Elizabeth Harper disappear from 1249. 2015. Martha Brennan dies of a heart attack after reporting seeing the Harpers. And now it was 2025. 10 years after Martha's death. The pattern was starting again. Rebecca looked at the calendar on her phone. April 15th was 3 weeks away. "Are you all right?" Helen asked, noticing Rebecca's pale face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not yet," Rebecca whispered, "but I think I'm going to." She thanked Helen and left the library in a daze, Martha's research files copied and clutched in her hands. The pattern was clear. Every 10 years the Harpers appeared. Every 10 years someone died or disappeared. And it always happened on April 15th. Rebecca had 3 weeks to figure out how to break the cycle. 3 weeks to survive what Martha, the Chens, Eleanor Hartwell, and the original Harpers couldn't. She drove home slowly, her mind racing. The house didn't just have a dark history. It was built on a foundation of tragedy and death. The boarding house, the suicides, the disappearances. Layer upon layer of horror, all connected by 2 figures who seemed to exist outside of time. Michael and Elizabeth Harper, who disappeared in 1975 but somehow reappeared in 2005 to disappear again. Who were they? What were they? When Rebecca pulled into her driveway, she noticed something that made her heart stop. The grass in the Harper yard had been mowed. The windows had been cleaned. The peeling paint looked fresh. The house that had been abandoned for 10 years suddenly looked maintained, cared for, lived in. And in the window of the master bedroom, she saw movement. A figure stepping back from the glass, disappearing into the shadows inside. They were preparing. April 15th was coming, and the Harpers, or whatever wore their faces, were getting ready. Rebecca spent the next 2 days trying to find anyone who'd survived an encounter with the Harpers. She tracked down former residents of 1247 and 1249, calling numbers, sending emails, leaving voicemails. Most didn't respond. A few told her to leave them alone, that they didn't want to talk about that house, that street, those years of their lives. But one person agreed to meet her. James Kowalski, son of Anna and Peter Kowalski, who'd lived in 1247 from 1975 to 1977, agreed to have coffee with Rebecca at a diner 30 miles outside Lancaster. He was in his 50s now, but when he talked about his childhood home, Rebecca could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt every night. "My mother never fully recovered," James said, stirring his coffee absently. "We moved away, started over, but she was never the same. She'd wake up screaming some nights, saying she could still hear them, the voices, the conversations." "What did she hear?" Rebecca asked. "Pieces of conversations, never full sentences. People talking, but the words never quite making sense, and always at night, always when she was trying to sleep." James looked up at Rebecca, but the worst part was the couple, the man and woman who'd come to the door. "Michael and Elizabeth Harper." James nodded. "She never knew their names, but from your description, yes. They came 3 times that I remember, always at night, always with something, a pie, a casserole, some kind of gift. My mother would look through the peephole and see them standing there, smiling. But when my father opened the door, no one was there, just empty porch. The cameras don't capture them either," Rebecca said. "I've tried." "Because they're not really there," James said. "Not in any physical sense. My mother figured that out eventually. They're more like," he struggled for the right word, "projections, echoes of something that happened, something that's still happening, in a way we can't fully understand." "Your mother researched this?" "She became obsessed with it after we moved, spent years trying to understand what we'd experienced. She eventually contacted a professor at Penn State, someone who studied paranormal phenomena. He had a theory." Rebecca leaned forward. "What was his theory?" "He called it a temporal loop. He said that sometimes when something traumatic happens, it creates a kind of scar in reality. The event repeats over and over, trapped in time. The people involved become part of the loop, unable to move forward, unable to escape. They're prisoners of that one moment, that one terrible event, playing it out again and again for eternity." "But the original Harpers disappeared in 1975, Rebecca said. "How can they still be appearing now, 50 years later?" "That's the thing about temporal loops," James explained. "They exist outside normal time. What happened 50 years ago is still happening now. It's all the same moment, stretched across decades. The Harpers who disappeared in 1975 are the same Harpers who disappeared in 2005. They're caught in the loop, and they're trying to pull others in with them." "Why? Why would they do that?" "Maybe they don't mean to," James said. "Maybe they're just repeating the last thing they did before they disappeared, welcoming a new neighbor. Or maybe—" he hesitated. "Maybe they need someone to take their place. Maybe that's the only way they can escape the loop." The implications of this made Rebecca feel sick. If James was right, the Harpers weren't malicious entities. They were victims, trapped in an endless cycle of disappearing and reappearing, unable to break free. And every 10 years they tried to find someone to take their place in the loop. "How did your mother survive?" Rebecca asked. "How did she break the pattern?" "She didn't let them in," James said simply. "No matter how many times they came to the door, no matter what they said, she never opened that door. She never acknowledged them beyond looking through the peephole. After we moved, they stopped coming. But Martha Brennan didn't open her door either, and she still died." James's expression darkened. "Martha lived there too long. The longer you stay in that house, the stronger the connection becomes. Eventually, they don't need you to open the door. They can reach you anyway." "How long did your family live there?" 2 years, and my mother said even that was too long. She could feel something changing in the house, like the walls were becoming thinner. The barrier between whatever the Harpers are and our reality was breaking down. He looked at Rebecca with genuine concern. How long have you been there? Almost 4 months. You need to leave, James said urgently. Sell the house, break your lease, whatever it takes. Just get out before April 15th. What happens on April 15th? That's when the loop resets. That's when they disappeared originally, and that's when something terrible always happens. The professor called it the apex point, the moment when the temporal loop is strongest, when the barrier is thinnest. That's when they can actually take someone. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks until the apex point. What if I can't leave? She asked. What if I can't sell the house in time? James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card. This is the professor my mother worked with, Dr. Marcus Reed. He's retired now, but he might still be willing to help. If anyone knows how to break a temporal loop, it's him. Rebecca took the card gratefully. Thank you so much. One more thing, James said as they prepared to leave. My mother's research suggested that the loop is anchored to something, some object or location that serves as a focal point. She thought it might be in the Harper house itself, 1249. Something in there that's keeping the whole thing active. If you could find it and destroy it, maybe you could break the loop. How do I get into that house? It's been locked for 10 years. I don't know, James admitted. But if you're going to try, do it before April 15th. After that date, the loop resets and you're back to square one. Or worse, you become part of it. Rebecca drove home in a daze, Dr. Reed's card clutched in her hand. When she pulled into her driveway, she looked at the Harper house and saw something that made her blood run cold. Someone was standing in the window, not hiding, not lurking, just standing there openly, looking out at her, and even from this distance, she could see the smile, that too-wide frozen smile. Elizabeth Harper waved at her, a slow, deliberate wave, and then she pointed at Rebecca's house, pointed at Rebecca herself. The message was clear. We know where you are. We're waiting. April 15th is coming. Rebecca grabbed her phone and called the number on Dr. Reed's card. It rang 4 times before an elderly man's voice answered. Dr. Reed speaking. Dr. Reed, my name is Rebecca Chen. James Kowalski gave me your number. I need your help. I'm living in a house in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I think I'm trapped in a temporal loop with 2 entities that call themselves Michael and Elizabeth Harper. There was a long pause. Then, 1247 Maple Drive. Yes. How did you know? Because I've been studying that location for 30 years, Dr. Reed said. And if you're calling me, it means the apex point is approaching. How long until April 15th? 3 weeks. Then we don't have much time. I need to see you in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Where are you? Philadelphia. I'll text you the address. Come tomorrow at noon. And Rebecca? His voice became grave. Don't go into that house next door. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, don't go in there. That's where they're strongest. That's where the anchor is. If you go in there alone, you won't come out. He hung up, and seconds later, an address appeared in her texts. Rebecca looked at the Harper house again. Elizabeth was gone from the window, but Rebecca could feel eyes on her, multiple eyes. They were watching, always watching, waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for the barriers to thin enough that they could reach across and pull her into their eternal nightmare. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to figure this out. 3 weeks to save her life. Dr. Marcus Reed's office was in an old brownstone in downtown Philadelphia, nestled between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. The building smelled of old wood and older books. Reed himself was in his 70s, with white hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was cluttered with books, papers, and strange instruments Rebecca couldn't identify. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "You look exhausted." "I haven't slept properly in days," Rebecca admitted. "Every night they come. Every night I hear them, and I keep seeing them in the windows next door, watching me." Reed nodded as if this was exactly what he expected. The approach to the apex point is always the most intense. The temporal loop starts to bleed through more strongly. The barriers thin. Time becomes unstable. He pulled out a thick folder, yellowed with age. I've been documenting the Maple Drive phenomenon for 3 decades. Your house and the one next door exist at the center of a temporal anomaly, unlike anything else I've studied. What James told you was correct. It is a loop. But it's more complicated than that. Reed spread several papers across his desk. Diagrams, timelines, newspaper clippings. In 1975, something happened at the boarding house that once stood where your homes now are. 2 people, the original Michael and Elizabeth Harper, disappeared under impossible circumstances. Witnesses say they were in their room one moment and gone the next. Doors locked from the inside, windows secured. They simply vanished into thin air. How is that possible? I believe they slipped through a crack in reality, a temporal fissure that opened in that location due to a combination of factors I'm still trying to understand. Geography, geology, perhaps even cosmic alignment. That fissure trapped them in a loop. They keep disappearing over and over, and in that perpetual moment of disappearance, they reach out to our reality. Rebecca tried to process this. So they're not ghosts? Not exactly. They're echoes of real people caught in a moment that never ends. And because that moment never ends, it keeps repeating. Every 10 years, on April 15th, the fissure widens. That's when someone dies or disappears, absorbed into the loop to take their place. It's been happening for 50 years. James mentioned an anchor, Rebecca said. Something that's keeping the loop active. Reed's expression became grim. Yes, I believe there's a physical object in the Harper house, 1249, that serves as the anchor point for the temporal fissure, something that belonged to the original Harpers, something that maintains their connection to this reality. If we could find it and remove it, we might be able to close the fissure and end the loop. What kind of object? I don't know. Something personal, something important to them. The research suggests it's in the master bedroom, which would make sense. That's where they disappeared from originally. I need to get into that house, Rebecca said. I know, and I'm going to help you. Reed pulled out a set of keys. These are lockpicks and tools. I've been inside 1249 twice over the years, though I've never made it to the master bedroom. Something always stops me. The loop knows I'm trying to end it, and it fights back. What do you mean it fights back? You'll see things in there, Reed warned. Terrible things, visions, hallucinations, manifestations of the loop's defense mechanisms. The house will try to scare you away, to confuse you, to trap you. You have to resist. You have to push through and find the anchor. Rebecca felt her courage wavering. What if I can't? What if I get trapped in there? Then you'll become part of the loop, Reed said honestly. You'll disappear on April 15th, and 10 years from now someone else will be sitting in this chair asking me the same questions. The weight of this settled over Rebecca like a heavy blanket. She thought about running, about abandoning the house and moving far away. But she remembered James's mother, who'd only lived there 2 years and still carried the trauma. She remembered Martha, who died terrified in that house. She thought about the original Harpers, trapped for 50 years in an endless moment of horror. Someone had to end this. Someone had to break the cycle. When do we go? Rebecca asked. Tonight, Reed said. We have 3 weeks until the apex point. But the closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes. Better to go now while we still have time to try again if the first attempt fails. You're coming with me? Someone has to. You can't do this alone. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Besides, I've been studying this for 30 years. It's time I finally solved it. They drove back to Lancaster in Reed's ancient Volvo, arriving just as the sun was setting. Rebecca's street looked normal. Families coming home from work, kids playing basketball in driveways, the peaceful suburban tableau of American life. But she knew better now. She knew what lurked behind that normal facade. The Harper house loomed dark and silent beside her own. The grass that had looked freshly mowed days ago was overgrown again, as if months had passed instead of hours. The windows were dark and forbidding. The whole structure seemed to radiate wrongness, a sense of something profoundly unnatural lurking within. Remember, Reed said as they sat in the car staring at the house, the loop will try to stop us. It'll show you things, terrible things. Resist the urge to flee, focus on the task, find the anchor, remove it, get out. That's all we have to do. What does the anchor look like? I don't know. but you'll recognize it when you see it. It'll be something that feels wrong, something that shouldn't be there, something that draws your attention. They got out of the car. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. They approached the front door of 1249 Maple Drive. Reed pulled out his lockpicks and went to work. "The lock is old," he muttered. "Should be easy enough to—" The door swung open on its own. Both Rebecca and Reed stepped back, startled. The house yawned open before them like a mouth, darkness pooling in the entryway. "It knows we're here," Reed whispered. "It's inviting us in." "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know, but we're committed now." He pulled a flashlight from his jacket and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close to me. Don't separate for any reason." They stepped into the Harper house. The smell hit them first, rot and mold and something else, something chemical and wrong. The house was cold, far colder than the evening outside. Their breath came out in visible puffs. The flashlight beam revealed a living room frozen in time, furniture covered in dust, newspapers on the coffee table dated April 14, 2005, the day before the Harpers disappeared. Everything looked as if the residents had just stepped out for a moment. A coffee mug sat on the side table, brown residue dried at the bottom. A TV remote lay on the couch, a jacket hung on the back of a chair. But there was something wrong with the room beyond its abandoned state. The furniture was in the wrong places, not drastically wrong, but subtly off. The couch was at a slight angle that made no sense. The pictures on the walls were hung too high or too low. The whole space felt wrong, as if someone had recreated the room from memory and gotten the details slightly incorrect. "Do you feel that?" Reed whispered. Rebecca did. A pulling sensation, like gravity, had shifted slightly. She felt drawn deeper into the house, toward the stairs leading to the second floor, toward the master bedroom. "The anchor is upstairs," Reed said. "Come on." They moved through the living room, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they passed the kitchen, Rebecca glanced inside and froze. Two figures stood at the counter, their backs to her, a man and a woman, perfectly still. She recognized them instantly, Michael and Elizabeth Harper. They wore the same clothes from the photographs, the same clothes they'd worn when they'd appeared at her door. They stood completely motionless, like mannequins, not breathing, not moving. "Don't look at them," Reed said urgently, grabbing her arm. "They're just manifestations. They're not real. Keep moving." But as they passed the kitchen doorway, both figures turned their heads in unison. Not their bodies, just their heads, rotating further than any human head should be able to turn. And they smiled, those horrible, too wide smiles. "Hello, Rebecca," they said in perfect unison. "We've been waiting for you. Would you like to stay for dinner?" Rebecca's legs felt like lead, but Reed pulled her forward. They reached the stairs and started climbing. Each step creaked loudly in the silence. Halfway up, Rebecca looked back and saw the Harpers standing at the bottom of the stairs, still smiling, watching them ascend. "Don't stop," Reed said. "Keep going." The second-floor hallway stretched before them, longer than it should be. 3 doors lined each side, but Rebecca knew from the house's layout that there should only be 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The hallway itself seemed to shift slightly, the walls breathing in and out like lungs. "Which door?" Rebecca asked. "End of the hall," Reed said, pointing. "Master bedroom." They walked down the hallway, and with each step, the temperature dropped. By the time they reached the master bedroom door, their breath came out in thick plumes of mist. Rebecca's fingers were numb with cold. Reed reached for the doorknob, then hesitated. "Whatever we see in there, remember, it's not real. The loop is trying to scare us away. Don't give in to the fear." He opened the door. The master bedroom was exactly as it had been described in police reports. A large bed unmade, dressers with drawers hanging open, clothes scattered on the floor, the window overlooking Rebecca's house, curtains drawn, and on the walls dozens of photographs. Photographs of Rebecca. She stepped closer, her blood running cold. These weren't the same as the photos in Arthur's apartment. These were different. These showed Rebecca in her house, in her bedroom, going about her daily life. But the dates written on them were wrong. The photos were labeled with dates from 2015, 2005, 1995, years before Rebecca had even moved in. "How?" she whispered. "The loop," Reed said, his voice tight. "Time is fluid here. Past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. To the loop, you've always been here. You've always been the next victim." Rebecca felt sick. She turned away from the photos and saw something that made her gasp. In the center of the room stood a small table. On the table sat a casserole dish, the same one the Harpers had been holding when they appeared at Rebecca's door. But this dish looked ancient, the ceramic cracked and stained. And around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were personal items. A watch, a wedding ring, a photograph, a hairbrush, car keys. "The anchor," Reed breathed. "That's it. That's what's holding the loop together." Rebecca approached the table slowly. The items seemed to pulse with a faint light, as if they were breathing. She reached out toward the casserole dish. "Don't touch it!" Reed shouted. Too late. Rebecca's fingers brushed the ceramic surface. The room exploded with light and sound. Suddenly, Rebecca wasn't in the bedroom anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere between, watching events unfold like a movie. She saw the original Harpers 50 years ago in this room. Saw them getting ready for bed, talking about their plans for the next day. Saw them lying down, turning off the lights, and then saw something impossible. The room beginning to fold in on itself, reality twisting and warping. The Harpers screaming as they were pulled into a vortex of light and darkness, their bodies stretching and distorting. And then they were gone, leaving only their personal items scattered on the floor and a horrible rip in reality itself, a wound that wouldn't heal. The vision shifted. She saw Eleanor Hartwell finding the items, trying to understand what had happened, saw her attempt to dispose of them, but they kept reappearing in this room, always returning. Saw her despair growing as she realized the loop couldn't be broken, saw her write her final note before hanging herself. The vision shifted again. She saw the house being demolished, the items somehow surviving. Saw them being incorporated into the new house at 1249, built on the same cursed ground. Saw each subsequent victim, the Chens, Martha, the modern Harpers who bought the house in 2003, completely unaware they shared names with the original victims. Saw them slowly realize something was wrong with their home. Saw them experience the same things Rebecca was experiencing now. And then saw them, on April 15, 2005, drawn to this room, touching these items, and being absorbed into the loop, becoming one with the original Harpers, their identities merging, their souls trapped forever in that moment of disappearance. And then Rebecca saw herself moving into 1247, saw herself researching the disappearance, saw herself coming to this house, this room, this moment, saw herself touching the casserole dish, and saw what would happen next, her own absorption into the loop, her own identity merging with the Harpers, becoming one more echo trapped in eternal repetition. No! Rebecca jerked her hand back and the vision shattered. She was back in the bedroom, gasping for air. Reed was shaking her, his face pale with fear. "What happened? You froze. You just stood there staring at that dish for 5 minutes?" "I saw it," Rebecca whispered. "I saw everything. The original disappearance, the loop forming, everyone who's been taken. Dr. Reed, we can't just remove the anchor. If we take those items, the loop will collapse, but everyone trapped inside will be lost forever. The original Harpers, the modern Harpers, everyone who's been absorbed, they'll be erased from existence." Reed's expression was anguished. "I know. I've always known. That's why I could never bring myself to finish this. To close the loop means condemning those people to oblivion. But if we don't, it continues. More victims every 10 years, forever." Rebecca stared at the casserole dish and the items surrounding it. Somewhere in that horrible collection of objects, souls were trapped. People who'd had lives, families, dreams. People who'd made one mistake, touching the anchor, and paid the ultimate price. "There has to be another way," Rebecca said desperately. "If there is, I haven't found it in 30 years of research," Reed said. "We have two choices: destroy the anchor and end the loop, condemning everyone inside to oblivion. Or leave it intact and accept that in 3 weeks on April 15th, you'll become the next victim." Rebecca looked at the photographs on the walls, photographs of her from years she hadn't lived yet. The loop had already decided her fate, unless she changed it. "What if we don't destroy it?" Rebecca said slowly, an idea forming. "What if we move it? Take it somewhere else, somewhere the temporal fissure can't reach." Reed considered this. "The anchor is tied to this location. Moving it might weaken the loop, but I'm not sure it would break it. The fissure opened here in this spot. The anchor keeps it stable, but the fissure itself is a scar in reality that exists independent of the anchor. But it's worth trying, isn't it? Better than doing nothing." Before Reed could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath came out in thick clouds of frost, and then Rebecca heard them. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Multiple pairs. "They're coming," Reed whispered. "We need to leave. Now." "Not without the anchor," Rebecca said. She grabbed the casserole dish, wincing as pain shot through her hand. The ceramic was ice cold, so cold it burned, but she held on, scooping up the items around it. The watch, the ring, the photograph, the hairbrush, the keys. She shoved them into her jacket pockets. The door to the bedroom slammed shut. The lock clicked. "Rebecca, what have you done?" Reed said, his voice tight with fear. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then they were in the hallway, moving toward the bedroom door. Not just two sets of footsteps now, many, dozens, all the victims, all the echoes, all the absorbed souls coming to stop them from taking the anchor. The doorknob began to turn. Rebecca ran to the window and threw it open. The fire escape, the same fire escape that connected to her house next door. It was their only way out. "Come on," she shouted to Reed. They climbed out onto the fire escape just as the bedroom door burst open. Rebecca caught a glimpse of what poured into the room, figure after figure, all wearing the faces of Michael and Elizabeth Harper. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, all the iterations from all the loops all coming together, all reaching for her. She and Reed scrambled down the fire escape, their footsteps clanging on the metal. Below them, more figures appeared, Harpers climbing up from the ground, blocking their descent. They were surrounded. "Jump," Reed shouted, pointing to Rebecca's yard. It was only one story down from where they were, and her yard had bushes that might break their fall. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She clutched the casserole dish to her chest and jumped. She hit the bushes hard, branches scratching her face and arms, but the casserole dish remained intact in her grip. Reed landed beside her a second later with a grunt of pain. "Run!" he gasped. They sprinted to Rebecca's house. She fumbled with her keys, dropped them, picked them up again. Behind them, the Harper figures poured out of 1249, emerging from doors and windows like a flood, all moving toward them with that same horrible synchronized motion. Rebecca got her door open, and they tumbled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. She ran to the windows, closing and locking each one. Reed helped, his breathing labored, his face pale with exertion and fear. When every entrance was secured, they collapsed in the living room, gasping for air. Rebecca still held the casserole dish, the anchor, the key to the entire nightmare. "We did it," she breathed. "We got the anchor." But Reed wasn't celebrating. He was looking at the window, his expression horrified. Rebecca followed his gaze, and her triumph turned to ash. The Harpers stood outside every window, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all pressing their faces against the glass, all smiling those terrible smiles, all waiting. "They can't get in," Rebecca said, trying to convince herself as much as Reed. "The doors are locked, the windows are secure." "For now," Reed said quietly. "But we have 3 weeks until April 15th, 3 weeks until the apex point. When the barriers are thinnest, Rebecca, we need to destroy that anchor before then. We need to end this." Rebecca looked down at the casserole dish in her hands. It was covered in ancient stains, cracked spider webbing across the ceramic, and inside, she could feel something. Not see it, not hear it, but feel it. Souls trapped in eternal torment, neither alive nor dead, caught in an endless moment of horror. Could she really destroy it? Could she condemn those people to oblivion? But if she didn't, she'd join them. And 10 years later, someone else would be sitting where she was now, holding the same anchor, facing the same impossible choice. The cycle had to end. Someone had to be brave enough to end it. "How do we destroy it?" Rebecca asked. Reed pulled out a leather journal from his jacket. "I've been researching methods for years. The anchor isn't just physical, it's temporal. Regular destruction won't work. We need to sever its connection to the fissure itself." "How?" "Fire," Reed said, "but not ordinary fire. We need to burn it at the exact location where the original boarding house stood, at the exact time the Harpers disappeared. 3:47 a.m. That's when the fissure first opened. If we can burn the anchor at that moment, we might be able to close the loop permanently." Rebecca looked at the calendar on her wall. They had 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks while the Harpers watched and waited outside her windows. 3 weeks to figure out how to end 50 years of horror. The first night was the worst. Rebecca and Dr. Reed sat in her living room, surrounded by the watching figures outside. Every window showed the same thing, faces pressed against the glass, hands touching the panes, leaving cold prints that frosted the windows despite the mild evening temperature. They didn't bang or scratch or try to break in, they just watched. And somehow that was more terrifying than any violence would have been. "Why don't they try to force their way in?" Rebecca whispered, afraid to speak too loudly as if her voice might give them permission to enter. "They're bound by certain rules," Reed explained, his voice equally quiet. "They can't enter a home without invitation. That's why they always come to the door with offerings, trying to trick people into welcoming them in. But now that you have the anchor, the rules might change. We're in uncharted territory." Rebecca clutched the casserole dish in her lap. The items she'd taken from the bedroom were spread on her coffee table. The watch, the ring, the photograph, showing a young couple she didn't recognize, presumably the original Harpers. The hairbrush still tangled with grey hair, and the car keys with a faded keychain. "Tell me again why we can't just destroy it now," Rebecca said. "Because timing is everything with temporal anomalies," Reed said. "If we destroy the anchor at the wrong moment, we could make things worse. We could strengthen the loop instead of breaking it, or create new fissures. We need to do this precisely. Same location where it started, same time it started. April 15th at 3:47 a.m. That's 3 weeks away." "I know. We just have to survive until then." Survive. Such a simple word for such a monumental task. Rebecca looked at the faces in her windows and wondered if 3 weeks was even possible. Around 2 a.m. Reed fell asleep in the armchair, exhausted from the night's ordeal. Rebecca stayed awake, watching the Harpers. There were so many of them now. She counted at least 50 distinct figures, all wearing the same 2 faces, all with that same frozen smile. They stood absolutely still, not even blinking, like statues arranged around her house. Then, at exactly 3:47 a.m., they all moved at once, turned away from her windows, facing the Harper house instead. They stood like that for 1 minute, perfectly synchronized, perfectly still. Then, at 3:48, they turned back to her windows and resumed their vigil. Rebecca realized with horror what she'd witnessed. They were reliving it. The moment of their disappearance, the moment they were absorbed into the loop. Every night at 3:47 a.m., they reenacted their final moments, trapped in eternal repetition. When dawn finally broke, the figures faded like mist in sunlight. One moment they were there, solid and real. The next they were gone, leaving only frost patterns on the windows and the memory of their presence. Reed woke with a start, looking around in confusion. Did they leave? When the sun came up, Rebecca confirmed, they just disappeared. They're tied to darkness, Reed said, rubbing his eyes. Another rule of the loop. They can only manifest at night. We're safe during the day. Are we really safe? Rebecca asked. Or are they just waiting for nightfall? Reed had no answer for that. They spent the day researching and preparing. Reed had brought books, journals, and equipment from his office. They set up a workspace in Rebecca's dining room, covering the table with materials about temporal anomalies, ritual destruction, and the specific history of the Maple Drive loop. We need to be absolutely precise, Reed explained, drawing diagrams. The original boarding house stood where both our houses now are. The main entrance was approximately here. He marked a spot on the diagram, which would be in your front yard now. That's where we need to perform the burning. In my front yard, in full view of the neighborhood. It'll be 3:47 in the morning. Most people will be asleep, and it needs to be exactly there. That's the epicenter of the fissure. Rebecca looked at his diagrams, trying to understand. What actually happens when we burn it? Will the loop just stop? If we do it correctly, yes. The anchor is what keeps the fissure stable. Without it, the fissure should collapse and the loop with it. Everyone trapped inside will be released. Released where? Released how? Reed's expression grew troubled. I don't know. Maybe they'll finally die, their souls moving on to whatever comes after. Maybe they'll simply cease to exist, erased from reality. Or maybe... He trailed off. Maybe what? Maybe they'll be trapped in that moment forever, but without the anchor to give them form in our reality. Eternal consciousness locked in a single frozen instant, unable to interact with anything, unable to escape, unable to even scream. The horror of this possibility made Rebecca feel sick. That would be worse than what they have now. I know, but it's a risk we have to take. The alternative is leaving the loop active, claiming a new victim every 10 years forever. Sometimes there are no good choices, only less terrible ones. They continued their research through the afternoon. Rebecca ordered food delivery, afraid to leave the house even in daylight. As the sun began to set, she felt her anxiety rising. Night was coming. The Harpers would return. She was right. The moment the last light faded from the sky, they appeared. More than before. Rebecca counted at least 70 figures now, surrounding her house completely. They'd brought reinforcements. They're getting stronger, Reed observed. The closer we get to April 15th, the more iterations can manifest simultaneously. By the apex point, there could be hundreds of them. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. It's meant to prepare you for what's coming. That night, the Harpers didn't just watch. They began to whisper, soft words that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, seeping through the walls despite the locked doors and windows. Rebecca, give it back. It belongs to us. You can't destroy it. Join us. Be part of the family. Forever and ever. One of us. The whispers overlapped, creating a horrible cacophony that made it impossible to think. Rebecca covered her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside her head, inside the house, in the walls, in the air itself. Reed was experiencing the same thing. He'd gone pale, his hands pressed against his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. "Don't listen," he shouted over the whispers. "They're trying to weaken our resolve." But how could Rebecca not listen when the voices were everywhere? They filled her mind, her thoughts, her very being. She felt herself starting to drift, starting to consider what they were saying. Maybe she should give the anchor back, maybe she should join them. It would be so much easier than fighting, so much less lonely than being the last one standing. No. Rebecca shook her head violently, forcing herself to focus. This was the loop's defense mechanism. It was trying to convince her to surrender, to give up, to become another victim. She couldn't let it win. She grabbed her phone and played music at full volume, loud, aggressive metal that drowned out the whispers. Reed caught on and did the same. Together, they created a wall of sound that pushed back against the supernatural voices. It worked. The whispers faded, retreating to just beyond the music's reach. They didn't stop completely, but they became manageable, ignorable. "Good thinking," Reed said, his voice hoarse. They spent the rest of the night like that, music blasting, trying to stay alert and sane while the Harpers watched from outside. Rebecca found herself checking the clock obsessively. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like an eternity. At 3:47 a.m., the figures turned away again, facing the Harper house, reenacting their moment of disappearance. Rebecca watched them through the window. These dozens of echoes, all perfectly synchronized, all trapped in the same horrible instant. She felt a strange mixture of fear and pity. They weren't villains, they were victims. Prisoners of time itself, unable to move forward or back, unable to do anything but repeat their final moments for eternity. But pity didn't change the fact that they wanted to trap her too. Didn't change the fact that they'd kill her to escape their prison, or at least make her join them in it. When dawn came and the figures faded, both Rebecca and Reed collapsed in exhaustion. They'd survived another night, only 20 more to go. The pattern continued for 3 days. During daylight, they prepared, researching the exact ritual they'd need to perform. That night they endured the siege, the watching faces, the whispers, the psychological warfare of the loop trying to break their will. On the 4th day, something changed. Rebecca woke from a restless nap to find Tom Johnson from across the street, standing on her front porch. She checked the security camera. It really was him, not a Harper manifestation. She opened the door cautiously. "Tom, is everything okay?" Tom looked worried. "Rebecca, Barbara and I are concerned about you. We've been watching your house the past few nights and, well, we've seen things, figures in your yard, shadows at your windows. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Rebecca's mind raced. How much should she tell him? Would he even believe her? "It's complicated." "Does it have to do with the Harper house?" Tom asked. "Because if it does, you need to be careful. Very careful. That place is cursed, Rebecca. We've known it for years, but we don't talk about it because, well, who would believe us?" "You've seen them too," Rebecca asked. "The Harpers?" Tom nodded slowly. "Barbara and I both have. Over the years we've seen figures at that house, in the windows, in the yard. They look like Michael and Elizabeth, but they're not. They can't be. And we've heard stories from other neighbors, people who've lived here longer than us. Stories about disappearances, about people who lived in your house or theirs and just vanished." Rebecca made a decision. "Tom, come inside. There's someone you should meet." She introduced Tom to Dr. Reed, and together they explained everything: the temporal loop, the anchor, the plan to destroy it on April 15th. Tom listened with growing alarm, occasionally glancing toward the Harper house visible through Rebecca's window. When they finished, Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I believe you. God help me, it sounds insane, but I believe you. Barbara and I have lived here too long, seen too much to dismiss this. What can we do to help?" "Keep watch during the day," Reed said. "We're vulnerable when we sleep. If anything tries to approach the house in daylight, wake us up. And on April 15th, we might need you to call the fire department if things go wrong." "The fire department?" "We're going to be burning something in Rebecca's front yard at 3:47 a.m., Reed explained. "If the fire gets out of control, we'll need help." Tom nodded grimly. "I'll be ready, and I'll tell Barbara. She'll want to help too." He paused at the door. "Good luck, Rebecca. End this thing. End it for all of us." After Tom left, Rebecca felt a small measure of relief. They weren't completely alone. They had allies, people who believed them, people who would help if things went wrong. But that relief was short-lived. That night, the siege intensified. The whispers came earlier that night, starting as soon as the sun set. But they were different now. Louder, more insistent, more personal. Rebecca Chen, age 32, graphic designer. "You moved here 3 months ago. You have a cat named Luna who died when you were 12. Your mother calls every Sunday. You're afraid of deep water. You dream about falling." They knew everything about her. Not just surface details, but intimate knowledge, fears she'd never told anyone, memories from childhood she'd half forgotten. The loop had been watching her, studying her, learning her vulnerabilities. "Make it stop," Rebecca begged Reed, but he was dealing with his own assault. "Dr. Marcus Reed, 73 years old. Your wife died 10 years ago. You blame yourself for not being there. You dream about her every night. You want to join her. Just open the door, and you can see her again." Reed's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Sarah," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Rebecca realized the loop had found their breaking points. It was no longer just trying to scare them. It was trying to destroy them psychologically, to crack them open and expose their deepest wounds. She grabbed Reed's shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "It's not real, whatever they're showing you, whatever they're saying, it's not real. They're manipulating you." But Reed's eyes were distant, unfocused. "She's outside," he mumbled. "Sarah's outside. I can see her. She wants me to come out. She's been waiting for me." Rebecca looked at the window. Among the Harper figures stood a woman who looked nothing like them, elderly, kind-faced, smiling gently, beckoning to Reed. "That's not her," Rebecca said firmly. "That's the loop. It's showing you what you want to see." "But what if it is her?" Reed asked, his voice breaking. "What if the loop connected to wherever she is? What if I could really see her again?" He stood up, moving toward the door. Rebecca grabbed him, but he was surprisingly strong for his age. He pulled away, reaching for the doorknob. "Dr. Reed, no! If you go out there, you'll be absorbed. You'll become part of the loop." "Then I'll be with Sarah," he said simply. "After 10 years alone, I'll finally be with her again." Rebecca didn't know what to do. She couldn't physically stop him. He was bigger and stronger despite his age. She couldn't reason with him. The loop had its hooks too deep in his psyche. She had only seconds to act before he opened that door and destroyed everything they'd worked for. She did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed the casserole dish and smashed it on the floor. The ceramic shattered into dozens of pieces. The items that had been stored in it scattered across the floor. The watch, the ring, the photograph, the hairbrush, the keys. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The figures outside screamed, a horrible unified shriek of agony and rage. The vision of Reed's wife disappeared like smoke. The whispers became static, then silence. Reed collapsed, clutching his head, the spell broken. And the house began to shake. Pictures fell from walls. Books toppled from shelves. The very foundations of reality seemed to tremble as the destroyed anchor sent shockwaves through the temporal loop. "What did you do?" Reed gasped, looking at the shattered ceramic. "I broke it," Rebecca said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't let you open that door. I couldn't let it take you. But the ritual, we were supposed to burn it at the exact moment. I know, I'm sorry. But you were going to—" The shaking intensified. Through the windows, Rebecca could see the Harper house changing. Its shape flickered, shifting between the modern structure and something older. The boarding house that had stood there 50 years ago. The two buildings occupied the same space simultaneously, overlapping, phasing in and out of reality. "We've destabilized the loop," Reed said, his voice filled with horror and awe. "By destroying the anchor without the proper ritual, we've created a temporal cascade. The loop is collapsing, but not cleanly. It's fragmenting, breaking apart in unpredictable ways. Is that good or bad? I don't know, this has never happened before." Outside, the Harper figures were changing too. Some began to age rapidly, decades passing in seconds. Others grew younger, regressing to children, then infants, then nothingness. Some split into multiple versions of themselves, different iterations existing simultaneously. The orderly siege had become chaos, the loop's carefully maintained structure falling apart. Then Rebecca saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the fragmenting Harpers, other figures began to appear. People she didn't recognize, a woman in a Victorian dress, a man in clothing from the 1920s, children in old-fashioned school clothes, dozens of them, hundreds, all materializing as the loop broke down and released its prisoners from across different time periods. "The loop is older than we thought," Reed breathed. "Much older. It didn't start with the Harpers. They were just the most recent iteration. This has been happening for over a century." The shaking grew worse. Cracks appeared in Rebecca's walls. Her windows shattered, one after another, exploding inward in showers of glass. She and Reed dove behind the couch for protection. Through the broken windows, the newly released figures began to drift, not walking, not floating, but moving in ways that defied physics, passing through walls and solid objects. They looked confused, lost, like people waking from a long dream with no memory of where they were or how they got there. Some of them noticed Rebecca and Reed. They turned their heads, the movement wrong, too fast, too smooth, and began moving toward the house. "We need to leave," Rebecca shouted over the noise of breaking reality. "We can't," Reed shouted back. "The temporal cascade is centered here. If we leave now, we could be caught in the collapse. We need to ride it out." "How long will that take?" "I don't know, minutes, hours, days. Time is literally breaking down." As if to prove his point, Rebecca looked at her watch and saw the hands spinning wildly, moving forward and backward simultaneously. Her phone showed the date changing rapidly, scrolling through years, decades, centuries. The freed figures reached the house and began passing through the walls. Rebecca watched in horror as they phased into her living room, dozens of ghost-like entities, all moving in a daze. They didn't seem hostile, but their very presence was wrong. They overlapped with solid objects, occupying the same space as furniture and walls. Some of them overlapped with each other, multiple bodies merging and separating like oil in water. One figure, a young woman in a dress from the 1940s, walked directly through where Rebecca was crouched. For a moment, their bodies occupied the same space, and Rebecca experienced something impossible. She felt the woman's memories, her emotions, her final moments before being absorbed into the loop. The woman's name was Dorothy. She'd lived in a boarding house on this spot in 1942. She'd disappeared one night after hearing voices in her room, calling to her, asking her to join them. She'd opened her door to see who was there, and in that instant, she'd been taken, trapped for over 80 years in a moment that never ended. The sensation passed as Dorothy continued through, leaving Rebecca gasping and disoriented. She now understood what Reed had meant about souls trapped in eternal consciousness. These people hadn't died. They'd been suspended, frozen in time, experiencing that final moment of horror for decades, unable to move forward or back, unable to even process what had happened to them. And now they were free, but they had nowhere to go. They were echoes without anchors, ghosts without graves, souls displaced from time itself. "Reed!" Rebecca screamed. "How do we help them? How do we end this properly?" But Reed wasn't listening. He was staring at something, his face a mask of wonder and grief. Rebecca followed his gaze and saw her, the elderly woman who'd appeared earlier, Reed's wife, Sarah. But she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by other figures, all of them more solid and real than the confused ghosts drifting through the house. "They're not part of the loop," Reed whispered. "They're actually dead. Really dead, not trapped. They're here because the collapse created a temporary bridge between our world and wherever they are." Sarah Reed smiled at her husband, her expression full of love and sadness. She shook her head slowly, a clear message. "Not yet. It's not your time." Reed's face crumpled. He raised his hand in a wave, a goodbye. Sarah waved back, and then she and the other truly dead figures began to fade, the bridge closing as the temporal cascade progressed. "Goodbye, my love," Reed whispered. The shaking reached a crescendo. Rebecca felt reality itself bending, twisting, trying to find a new equilibrium. The confused ghosts of the loop's victims swirled around them like a supernatural storm. The Harper house outside flickered faster and faster between its various iterations across time. And then, with a sound like the universe sighing, everything stopped. The shaking ceased. The ghosts froze in place. Time held its breath. For one perfect moment, nothing moved, nothing changed. Everything existed in a state of pure potential, balanced on the edge of a knife between chaos and order. Then reality snapped back like a rubber band. The ghosts evaporated like mist in sunlight. The Harper house solidified into its modern form. The cracks in Rebecca's walls sealed themselves. The broken windows reformed, glass fragments flying back together to create whole panes. It was over. The temporal cascade had resolved. The loop was gone. Rebecca and Reed sat in stunned silence, barely able to process what had just happened. Outside, dawn was breaking. Though whether it was the same day they'd started or days had passed, Rebecca couldn't tell. Her watch showed the correct time again. Her phone displayed today's date. Reality had restored itself. "Is it?" Rebecca started, hardly daring to hope. "Is it over?" Reed slowly got to his feet, his body aching from being crouched behind the couch. He went to the window, now impossibly intact, and looked out at the Harper house. "I think so," he said quietly. "The loop is broken. The anchor is destroyed. The fissure has closed. What about all those people, the ones who were trapped? Released, I hope, sent to wherever we go when we die. Free at last after decades of imprisonment." Reed's voice was heavy with emotion. "At least I hope that's what happened. The alternative—" He didn't finish the sentence. Neither of them wanted to think about the alternative. Rebecca stood and surveyed her living room. Despite the violence of the temporal cascade, everything looked normal now. The casserole dish lay in pieces on the floor, the only evidence that any of it had really happened. She picked up one of the fragments and felt nothing, just ceramic. No supernatural energy, no temporal resonance, just a broken dish that had once served as the anchor for 50 years of horror. "We did it," she said, still not quite believing it. "We actually did it." "You did it," Reed corrected. "If you hadn't broken the anchor when you did, I would have opened that door, I would have been taken. But the ritual, we didn't do it properly. We were supposed to burn it on April 15th at 3:47 a.m. "Desperate times called for desperate measures," Reed said with a small smile, "and it seems that destroying the anchor was enough regardless of timing. The collapse was chaotic, but it accomplished what we needed. The loop is gone." They spent the next few hours cleaning up and talking, trying to process what they'd experienced. Reed examined every corner of the house, checking for any residual temporal anomalies. He found none. Rebecca went outside and walked around the property, looking at the Harper house from every angle. It looked exactly as it had when she'd first moved in, abandoned, overgrown, neglected, but it no longer felt wrong. It was just an empty house now, nothing more. Around noon, Tom and Barbara Johnson hurried across the street, their faces etched with concern. "We saw lights," Tom said. "Strange lights from your house last night. And we heard sounds like thunder, but wrong somehow. Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Rebecca assured them. "It's over. The loop is broken. The Harpers won't be coming back." Barbara's eyes filled with tears. "Really? After all these years, it's finally over?" "It's over," Reed confirmed. The elderly couple hugged each other, relief visible on their faces. How long had they lived in fear of that house, of what it represented? How many sleepless nights had they spent watching for figures in the darkness, wondering if they'd be next? "What happened to them?" Barbara asked. "The people who were trapped?" "We freed them," Rebecca said simply. She didn't mention the chaos, the temporal cascade, the moment of pure terror when reality itself had nearly shattered. Some details were better left unsaid. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to normal. Rebecca fixed the damage to her house that the temporal cascade had somehow missed in its reality-repairing sweep. Scuff marks, a cracked tile, small things. Reed stayed with her, helping to document everything that had happened for his research. On the fourth day after the collapse, something unexpected happened. A real estate agent's car pulled up to the Harper house. A woman in a business suit got out, looked around the property with a critical eye and began taking notes. Rebecca watched from her window, confused. Within an hour, a "for sale" sign went up in the yard, a proper one this time, not the faded relic that had been there before. "That's impossible," Rebecca said to Reed. "The bank owned that property. It's been tied up in legal limbo for 10 years. "Not anymore," Reed observed. "When the loop collapsed, it didn't just free the trapped souls. It also untangled all the temporal anomalies associated with the property. The legal issues, the probate nightmare, all of it was connected to the loop's influence. Now that the loop is gone, those obstacles have vanished too. The house is just a normal property again. You think someone will actually buy it? I do. It's a good house in a good neighborhood. With the curse lifted, there's no reason someone wouldn't want it." 2 weeks later, the Harper house sold. A young family moved in, parents with 2 small children. Rebecca watched nervously as they unpacked their moving truck, half expecting something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The house was just a house now. The father mowed the lawn, the mother planted flowers, the children played in the yard. Normal suburban life. Rebecca introduced herself to the new neighbors, careful not to mention the house's history. They were nice people, friendly and optimistic about their fresh start. Their last name was Patterson, and they'd moved from Ohio for a job opportunity. They knew nothing about the Harpers, the disappearances, the temporal loop, and Rebecca intended to keep it that way. Dr. Reed eventually returned to Philadelphia, promising to write a paper about their experience, though he admitted no one would likely believe it without evidence. The broken pieces of the casserole dish went with him, to be studied and documented. He hugged Rebecca goodbye and she saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, for saving my life, for breaking the loop, for ending 50 years of horror. We did it together, Rebecca reminded him. Perhaps, but you were braver than I was. When the moment came, you didn't hesitate. You did what needed to be done. He paused. Sarah would have liked you. After he left, Rebecca felt strangely empty. The crisis was over. The nightmare had ended. She'd survived something impossible and emerged victorious. So why did she feel so hollow? It took her several more weeks to realize. She'd changed. The experience had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She'd touched the anchor, seen the loop's memories, felt the trapped soul's anguish. She'd witnessed reality itself break and reform. She'd stood at the edge of oblivion and pulled back. You couldn't experience something like that and remain the same person. She threw herself into work, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. She dated David for a few more months, but the relationship fizzled out. She couldn't explain where she'd been, what she'd experienced, why she sometimes woke up screaming from nightmares about frozen smiles and hands pressed against glass. He was a good man, but he lived in a normal world where temporal loops and supernatural horrors didn't exist. Rebecca could never fully inhabit that world again. Maya visited in June and immediately noticed the change. "What happened to you?" she asked bluntly. "And don't say nothing. You're different, harder somehow, sadder." Rebecca considered lying, but Maya deserved the truth. So she told her everything. The Harpers, the loop, the anchor, the temporal cascade, all of it. Maya listened in stunned silence. When Rebecca finished, her friend said quietly, "I believe you. I saw something that first weekend I visited, remember? The shadow at your window. I knew something was wrong with that house, I just didn't know how wrong. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. Don't be sorry. I probably would have thought you were crazy." Maya took Rebecca's hand. "But you survived. You won. That's what matters." "Did I win?" Rebecca asked. "Or did I just delay the inevitable? What if the loop comes back? What if there are more anchors, more fissures, more temporal scars waiting to trap people?" "Then you'll handle them too," Maya said firmly. "Because that's who you are now. Someone who doesn't run from monsters. Someone who breaks curses." Life went on. Summer turned to fall. The Patterson family next door became friendly neighbors, occasionally borrowing tools or inviting Rebecca over for barbecues. The children, Emma, age 6, and Jack, age 4, were sweet kids who sometimes played in Rebecca's yard when their ball went over the fence. It was almost possible to forget what the house had once been, what horrors it had contained. Almost. Rebecca still had nightmares. At least twice a week she'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced she heard whispers in the walls or saw faces at her windows. She'd checked the security cameras, she'd kept them installed, and find nothing. Just empty yards, quiet street, normal suburban darkness. She joined a support group for people who'd experienced trauma, though she couldn't tell them the real story. She invented a break-in, a stalker, something more believable than temporal loops and supernatural entities. It helped a little. The therapist taught her breathing exercises, mindfulness techniques, ways to manage the anxiety that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. Dr. Reed called every few weeks to check on her. His paper on temporal anomalies had been published in a fringe scientific journal, where it was promptly dismissed by most of the academic community as creative fiction. But a few people reached out, others who'd experienced similar phenomena, other researchers studying the boundaries between physics and the supernatural. Reed had found his community, people who believed him, and he seemed more at peace than he'd been in years. "I've been thinking about Sarah," he told Rebecca during one call in September, "about seeing her during the collapse. I used to think I'd failed her by not being there when she died. But she showed me that it wasn't my time yet, that I still had work to do. Ending the loop, that was my work, my purpose. And now I can live whatever time I have left without that guilt." "I'm glad," Rebecca said sincerely. "You deserve peace." "So do you," Reed said. "Have you thought about moving? Getting away from that place and all its memories?" Rebecca had thought about it, often, but something kept her there. Maybe it was stubbornness, refusing to let fear drive her from her home. Maybe it was responsibility, wanting to make sure the loop stayed broken, that no one else suffered what she'd suffered. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something she didn't fully understand. "Not yet," she told Reed. "Maybe someday. But not yet." October arrived, bringing cool weather and changing leaves. Halloween decorations appeared on houses throughout the neighborhood. The Pattersons put up an elaborate display: skeletons, fake cobwebs, orange lights. Emma and Jack were excited about trick-or-treating, already planning their costumes weeks in advance. Rebecca decorated too, though she found herself avoiding anything too scary. No ghosts, no figures in windows, nothing that might remind her of watching faces and frozen smiles. She stuck to pumpkins and autumn leaves, cheerful and safe. On October 31st, Halloween night, she handed out candy to dozens of costumed children. Emma and Jack Patterson came by dressed as a princess and a dinosaur respectively, their parents trailing behind with cameras and indulgent smiles. It was wholesome and normal, and exactly what Rebecca needed. But that night, after the last trick-or-treater had gone home and she'd turned off her porch light, Rebecca heard something that made her blood run cold. A knock at her door. 3 gentle raps, familiar and terrible. She grabbed her phone, pulled up the security camera feed. The porch was empty, no one there. The knock came again, same rhythm, same sound. Rebecca's hands shook. This couldn't be happening. The loop was broken, the anchor was destroyed. This couldn't be happening. She looked through the peephole. Empty porch, but the knocking continued, persistent and real. Then a voice, muffled through the door. "Rebecca, it's Dr. Reed. Let me in, please. I need to talk to you." Rebecca's heart hammered. Reed hadn't mentioned visiting. He would have called first. And his voice sounded wrong, too flat, too emotionless. "Dr. Reed," she called through the door, "is that really you?" "Of course it's me. Please open the door. I have news about the loop, important news." The loop. He said, "The loop, not the temporal anomaly or our research." Reed was careful with his language, always precise, and he'd never show up unannounced at 11 p.m. on Halloween. "Tell me something only the real Dr. Reed would know," Rebecca said. Silence. Then, "What do you mean?" "Rebecca, I'm standing in the cold. Just let me in." "What was your wife's name?" More silence. Too long. And when the voice came again, it had changed, dropped the pretense of being Reed entirely. "Sarah," it said. But the voice was now dual-toned, male and female speaking in unison. "Her name was Sarah, just like Elizabeth's middle name was Sarah, just like your mother's name is Sarah. So many Sarahs, Rebecca. So many names, so many people, all connected, all part of the pattern." Rebecca backed away from the door, her stomach twisting with dread. "The loop is broken. I destroyed the anchor." "You destroyed one anchor," the voices said. "Did you really think there was only one? Did you really think 50 years of temporal scarring could be erased by breaking a single dish?" The security camera still showed an empty porch, but Rebecca could hear footsteps now, multiple footsteps, circling her house, surrounding it. "There are many anchors," the voices continued, "scattered across time, across space. You found one, yes, you broke one. But the loop is vast, Rebecca. It's been growing for over a century. It has roots you can't imagine, branches you can't see. You weakened it, but you didn't kill it." Rebecca ran to her back door, checked the windows. Her security cameras showed nothing, but she could hear them. Dozens of footsteps, maybe hundreds, all moving in that horrible, synchronized way. "We're stronger now," the voices said. "The collapse you caused didn't destroy us, it fed us. All those released souls, all that temporal energy, we absorbed it. We're not just Michael and Elizabeth anymore. We're everyone who was ever trapped. We're Legion." The whispers started again, not from outside this time, but from inside her head. "You can't fight us. You're alone. Dr. Reed can't help you. The Pattersons won't hear you scream. The loop always wins. Join us. Join us. Join us." Rebecca grabbed her phone and called Reed. It rang once, then went dead. She tried again. Same thing. She tried 911, deadline. The house began to shake, not violently like during the temporal cascade, but subtly, rhythmically like a heartbeat. like the building itself was alive and breathing. "We learned from you," the voices said. "You showed us the way. When you broke the anchor without the proper ritual, when you caused the cascade, you opened doors that were meant to stay closed. You connected the loop to every point in its history simultaneously. You made us stronger than we'd ever been." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. This couldn't be happening. She'd won. She'd broken the curse. She'd saved everyone. "You saved no one," the voices said, reading her thoughts. "You only postponed the inevitable. The loop cannot be broken, Rebecca. It can only grow. And now it's time for you to join us. It's been time since you first moved here, since you first looked at our house and felt that pull. You were always meant to be part of this. You were always ours." The front door began to open even though it was locked. The deadbolt turned on its own, the chain unlatched itself, the door swung wide. Michael and Elizabeth Harper stood on her porch, illuminated by her porch light that had been off moments ago. They looked exactly as they had that first night, smiling, holding a casserole dish, perfectly normal, except for the wrongness that radiated from them like heat from a fire. "Hello, Rebecca," they said in unison. "We're your neighbors from next door. We wanted to welcome you to Maple Drive." Rebecca screamed, and then she woke up. She was in her bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. It was morning, November 1st, according to her phone. Halloween was over. It had been a dream, just a nightmare. A terrible, vivid nightmare born from trauma and fear and too many sleepless nights. Rebecca lay there breathing hard, waiting for her heart rate to slow. Just a dream. The loop was broken. She was safe. Everything was fine. But as she got up and went to the bathroom, something caught her eye. On her front porch, visible through her bedroom window, sat a casserole dish, covered with aluminum foil, placed carefully on her welcome mat. Her doorbell rang. 3 gentle raps. Rebecca ran to the window and looked down. The Pattersons stood on her porch, smiling up at her. Emma and Jack waved enthusiastically. "We made you breakfast," Mrs. Patterson called up. "As a thank you for all the candy last night. We left it on your porch." Rebecca sagged with relief. Of course, just the neighbors being friendly. Nothing sinister. Nothing supernatural, just normal human kindness. She waved back, smiling. "Thank you. That's so sweet." She went downstairs and opened the door. The Pattersons were already walking back to their house. Rebecca picked up the casserole dish and brought it inside. It was warm, smelled delicious. She lifted the aluminum foil and found homemade cinnamon rolls, still steaming. There was a note tucked beside them, written in Mrs. Patterson's cheerful handwriting. "Welcome to the neighborhood, the Harper family." Rebecca dropped the dish. It shattered on her floor, cinnamon rolls scattering everywhere, the Harper family. But their name was Patterson. She'd met them, talked to them, seen their mail. Their name was Patterson. Unless it wasn't. Unless the loop had changed things. Unless reality itself had been rewritten and she was the only one who remembered it differently. Rebecca grabbed her phone and pulled up her text history with Dr. Reed. The most recent message was from him, sent 3 hours ago. "Rebecca, I need you to call me immediately. I've discovered something about the secondary anchors. We made a terrible mistake. The loop isn't broken, it's evolving. Call me now." But she'd been asleep 3 hours ago. She hadn't seen this message until now. With shaking hands, she called Reed. He answered on the first ring. "Rebecca, thank God. Listen to me very carefully. Do not interact with your neighbors. Do not go into their house. The family that moved in next door, they're not real. They're constructs of the loop, new iterations designed to blend in, to seem normal. The loop is adapting, evolving, learning from its past failures." "But I've been talking to them for months," Rebecca said weakly. "They're real people. They have children. They have jobs and lives and—" "What are their names?" Reed asked. "The parents." "What are their names?" Rebecca opened her mouth to answer and realized she didn't know. In all the months of neighborly interactions, she'd never learned their first names. They were just Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. Except that note had said Harper. "Oh, God," Rebecca whispered. The loop created them, Reed said. Physical bodies, complete with histories and identities. It's found a new way to trap people, not through fear and supernatural horror, but through normalcy and friendship. It wants you to get close to them, to trust them, to accept an invitation into their house, and once you cross that threshold willingly... I become part of the loop, Rebecca finished. Exactly. Rebecca, you need to leave. Today, right now. Pack what you need and go. Get as far from that house as possible. What about them, the family? Even if they're constructs, they seem real. They have consciousness, personalities. Can we just abandon them? They're not real, Reed insisted. They're extensions of the loop, puppets made of temporal energy and stolen memories. You can't save them because there's nothing to save. Rebecca looked out her window at the house next door. Through the kitchen window, she could see Mrs. Patterson, or Mrs. Harper, or whatever her name really was, making breakfast. Emma and Jack were setting the table. It looked like any normal family on any normal morning. Except it wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. I'll pack, Rebecca said. I'll leave today. Good. Call me when you're on the road. We need to figure out our next move. The loop is more intelligent than we thought, more adaptive. We might need help. What kind of help? I don't know yet. But this is bigger than us now, Rebecca. This is something that needs to be contained before it spreads. After hanging up, Rebecca began throwing clothes into a suitcase. She grabbed her laptop, important documents, anything she couldn't replace. She moved quickly, urgently, desperate to get out before... A knock at her door, gentle, friendly. Rebecca, Mrs. Patterson's voice, or Mrs. Harper's, or whatever entity wore that face. Are you okay? I heard something break. Did you drop the cinnamon rolls? Rebecca froze, hardly breathing. Rebecca, I'm coming in, okay? I still have the spare key you gave me last month. She'd never given them a spare key. She was certain of that. But she heard it anyway. A key turning in her lock, the door opening. Footsteps in her hallway coming toward her bedroom. Rebecca, why are you packing? Are you going somewhere? The woman appeared in her bedroom doorway. She still looked like Mrs. Patterson, kind face, concerned expression, wearing an apron with flour dusted on it. But her eyes were wrong, too bright, too knowing, and when she smiled, it was just a bit too wide. You're not leaving, are you? She asked. We've grown so close over these months. Emma and Jack adore you. It would break their hearts if you left without saying goodbye. I have to go, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. Family emergency. Liar, Mrs. Patterson Harper said, her voice still friendly but with an edge underneath. You're running, just like all the others tried to run, but the loop always catches up eventually, Rebecca. You can't outrun time itself. She stepped into the room, and with each step her form flickered. For brief moments she wasn't Mrs. Patterson at all. She was Elizabeth Harper. Then she was someone else, an elderly woman Rebecca didn't recognize. Then a young man. Then back to Mrs. Patterson. The loop was having trouble maintaining the illusion now that Rebecca knew the truth. We've been so patient with you, the entity said. We gave you months of normalcy. Months to forget, to relax, to lower your guard. We became your friends, your neighbors, your surrogate family. Also you'd trust us. Also you'd willingly cross our threshold one day and join us forever. I destroyed the anchor, Rebecca said, backing away as the entity advanced. I broke the loop. You broke one anchor, the entity agreed. But we've learned. We've adapted. We don't need anchors anymore, Rebecca. We've become self-sustaining. The loop feeds on time itself now. On the moments between moments, on the spaces between seconds. We're everywhere and nowhere. We're in every temporal shadow, every déjà vu, every moment you feel like you've lived before. Rebecca's back hit the wall. Nowhere left to retreat. The entity stood inches away now, close enough that Rebecca could feel the cold radiating from its body, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the absence of genuine life. Join us, it said softly. Stop fighting. Accept your place in the pattern. You've always been part of this, Rebecca. Since before you were born, since before your parents met, since before your grandparents existed. The loop reaches backward and forward through time, and you are a thread in its tapestry, Stop resisting and just let go. Rebecca felt the pull then, stronger than ever before. The urge to surrender, to accept, to stop fighting the inevitable. It would be so easy, so peaceful. No more nightmares, no more fear, no more running. Just eternal acceptance, eternal belonging, eternal... Her phone rang, breaking the spell. Dr. Reed's name flashed on the screen. The entity hissed, its friendly mask slipping completely. For just a moment, Rebecca saw what it really was. A writhing mass of temporal energy barely contained in a human-shaped form. Faces and bodies from a century of victims all merged into a single, horrible entity. Then it composed itself, snapping back into the form of Mrs. Patterson. "Don't answer that," it said. "Dr. Reed can't help you. No one can help you. This is happening, Rebecca. This has already happened. From the Loop's perspective, you've already joined us. We're just waiting for you to catch up to your own timeline." But Rebecca answered the phone. "Reed? Get out now!" he shouted. "The Loop is manifesting physically. I can see it from here, through the temporal sensors. The entire house next door is becoming a gateway. If you stay there another minute..." The line went dead. The entity was smiling again, that horrible too-wide smile. The line went dead. The entity was smiling again, that horrible too-wide smile. "You see," it said, "even your technology fails against us. We control time, Rebecca, and time controls everything else." Rebecca made a decision. She couldn't fight this thing. She couldn't reason with it. But maybe she could outrun it, at least temporarily. She grabbed her suitcase and ran for the bedroom window, throwing it open. "You can't escape," the entity said, not bothering to chase her. It stood calmly in the middle of her bedroom, watching with amusement. "There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you." Rebecca climbed out the window onto the small balcony outside, then jumped down to her yard. She landed hard, pain shooting through her ankle, but she kept moving. She limped to her car, threw her suitcase in the back seat, and fumbled for her keys. Through her rearview mirror, she could see the entity standing in her bedroom window, still wearing Mrs. Patterson's face, still smiling. And next to it, two smaller figures appeared, Emma and Jack, the children who weren't really children. All three waved goodbye in perfect synchronization. Rebecca started her car and floored it, tires squealing as she pulled out of her driveway. She didn't look back. She just drove as fast as she dared through the quiet suburban streets, desperate to put distance between herself and that house, that Loop, that horrible thing wearing her neighbor's face. She'd made it 3 blocks when she noticed something impossible. The Harper house was in front of her. That couldn't be right. She'd driven away from Maple Drive, turned onto different streets. She'd been driving for 5 minutes. But there it was, 1249 Maple Drive, sitting on a corner she'd never seen before, in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. Rebecca turned down a different street, drove faster, but after 2 more turns the Harper house appeared again, now on her right side, somehow transplanted to a completely different location. "No," Rebecca whispered. "No, no, no." She kept driving, turning randomly, trying to escape, but the house followed. Sometimes it appeared on her left, sometimes on her right. Once, horrifyingly, it appeared directly in front of her, and she had to swerve to avoid crashing into it. The Loop had evolved beyond physical location. It wasn't tied to one place anymore. It could manifest anywhere, everywhere, following its prey through space as easily as it moved through time. Rebecca pulled over in a parking lot, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't drive anymore. She grabbed her phone and tried calling Reed again. The call connected, but all she heard was static. Then, through the static, voices. "Rebecca, join us. Stop running. Come home. We're waiting. We'll always be waiting." She threw the phone down and buried her face in her hands. This was impossible. She'd destroyed the anchor. She'd collapsed the Loop. She'd won. How could this be happening? A tap on her car window made her scream. She looked up to see Tom Johnson standing there, looking concerned. He was wearing his usual cardigan, holding a newspaper, looking exactly as he always did. Rebecca rolled down her window cautiously. "Tom? Rebecca, are you all right? Barbara and I saw you speed out of your driveway. We were worried." "Tom, thank God. I need help. The Loop, it's not broken. It's evolved." The Pattersons aren't real, they're— The Pattersons? Tom interrupted, looking confused. Who are the Pattersons? Rebecca's blood ran cold. My neighbours. The family that moved into the Harper house 6 months ago. Tom shook his head slowly. Rebecca, the Harper house has been empty for 10 years. No one's moved in. What are you talking about? But I've been talking to them for months. Mrs. Patterson brought me cinnamon rolls this morning. Emma and Jack play in my yard. Rebecca, Tom said gently, his voice full of concern, there's no one named Patterson. The Harper house is still abandoned, has been since 2005. Are you feeling all right? Should I call someone? Rebecca stared at him in horror. The loop was rewriting reality again, changing things, making people forget. Or maybe Tom was part of it too. Maybe everyone was part of it now. She rolled up her window and started driving again, leaving Tom standing confused in the parking lot. She drove without direction, without destination, just moving, trying to think. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, afraid of what she'd hear. But she was desperate for any connection to reality, to someone who might help. She answered. Rebecca Chen. An unfamiliar woman's voice. Who is this? My name is Dr. Sarah Morrison. I'm a temporal physicist working with Marcus Reed. He gave me your number before he disappeared. Rebecca's stomach dropped. What do you mean, disappeared? 3 hours ago, he called me in a panic, saying something about an evolved loop and a patient in danger. Then his phone went dead. When I got to his apartment, he was gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of where he went, just gone. Like he'd vanished into thin air. Oh God, the loop took him. That's what I'm afraid of. Rebecca, I need you to listen carefully. Based on Reed's notes, you're dealing with a Class 5 temporal anomaly. It's achieved consciousness and agency. It's no longer just a loop, it's a predator. And it's hunting you. How do I stop it? You can't. Not alone. You need to get to my lab in Philadelphia. I have equipment that can shield you from temporal manipulation. Once you're here, we can figure out how to fight this thing properly. The loop is following me, Rebecca said. The Harper house keeps appearing wherever I go. How do I get to Philadelphia if I can't escape? Drive in a straight line, don't make any turns. The loop exploits decision points, moments where you choose one path over another. Those moments create temporal branches it can manipulate. If you drive straight, no turns, you remove those decision points, it should give you enough time to get here. Should. I can't guarantee anything with Class 5 anomalies, but it's your best chance. Dr. Morrison gave Rebecca her address and hung up. Rebecca pulled out her phone's GPS, set the destination to Philadelphia, and studied the route. She needed to find a straight road, one that ran for miles without requiring turns. She drove for 20 minutes until she found it, Route 30, a long stretch of highway that ran relatively straight toward Philadelphia. She merged onto it and accelerated, keeping her speed steady, her path unwavering. For the first few miles, nothing happened. The Harper house didn't appear. The loop seemed to respect the straight-line rule, or at least couldn't overcome it immediately. But then Rebecca started noticing other things, cars on the highway that looked familiar, the same blue sedan passing her multiple times, the same red truck in her rearview mirror disappearing and reappearing, the same rest stop appearing on her right every few miles, even though she'd only passed it once. The loop was testing her, probing her defenses, looking for weaknesses in her straight-line strategy. Her phone rang again. Dr. Morrison. Rebecca, I'm tracking your location. You're doing well. Just keep going straight. 45 more miles. The same cars keep appearing, the same buildings. Is that normal? It's the loop trying to create decision points. It's showing you familiar things, trying to make you react, to swerve, to turn. Don't. Just keep driving straight. Ignore everything else. A figure appeared on the side of the road ahead. Rebecca's breath caught. It was Dr. Reed, waving frantically, clearly in distress. Rebecca, help! He shouted as she approached. The loop has me. You have to stop. Rebecca's foot moved toward the brake instinctively, but then she remembered Morrison's words. Don't react. Keep driving straight. She pressed the accelerator instead, speeding past Reed's figure. In her rearview mirror, she saw him transform, his form flickering, changing, becoming Michael Harper, then Elizabeth, Then a dozen other faces, all merged together. Not Reed at all, just another manifestation of the loop. "Good," Dr. Morrison's voice said in her ear. Rebecca hadn't realized she was still on the call. "Very good. You're learning. Don't trust anything you see. The loop will use every trick it knows." More figures appeared on the roadside. Her parents, Maya, David, Tom and Barbara Johnson, all of them waving, shouting, begging her to stop. Rebecca drove past them all, her jaw clenched, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Then she saw something that almost broke her resolve. Emma and Jack Patterson, the children, standing on the shoulder of the highway. They looked terrified, confused, crying. So real, so innocent. "Please, Miss Rebecca," Emma cried. "We're scared. We don't know where we are." "Mommy left us," Jack sobbed. "Please help us." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Even if they weren't real, even if they were just constructs of the loop, they seemed to have genuine fear, genuine consciousness. Could she really just drive past children in need? "They're not real," Dr. Morrison said firmly in her ear, reading Rebecca's hesitation. "Rebecca, listen to me. Those aren't children. They never were. They're bait. Sophisticated bait, designed to exploit your empathy. Don't stop." "But what if they are real?" Rebecca whispered. "What if the loop created them with actual consciousness? What if abandoning them is murder?" "Then it's murder you have to commit to save yourself and countless others," Morrison said brutally. "Because if the loop catches you, if it absorbs you, it grows stronger, and then more real children, actual human children, will suffer. You have to choose, Rebecca. Save constructs that might have consciousness, or save actual humans who definitely do." It was an impossible choice, the kind of moral dilemma that had no right answer, but Rebecca made her decision. She pressed the accelerator and drove past the crying children, their pleas fading behind her. In her rearview mirror, she saw them change. Their faces morphed, became adult, became the Harpers, became something else entirely, not children at all, just another trap that she'd barely escaped. 20 miles, Dr. Morrison said. "You're almost here." But the loop wasn't done. The sky began to darken, even though it was mid-afternoon. Storm clouds gathered with impossible speed, turning day into night in seconds. Rain began to fall, except it wasn't falling down. It was falling up, drops rising from the ground toward the sky, defying gravity itself. The road ahead started to twist, not physically but perceptually. Rebecca could see it happening, the straight highway beginning to curve and bend, creating turns where none had existed before. The loop was literally rewriting reality, reshaping the road to force her into decisions. "Morrison, the road is changing. I see it on the temporal sensors. The loop is desperate now. It knows you're about to escape. It's throwing everything it has at you. You have to trust that the road is still straight, Rebecca. What you're seeing is illusion. Keep your steering wheel steady. Don't turn. Trust your instruments, not your eyes." Rebecca closed her eyes, relying only on the feel of the car, the gentle vibration of the wheels on pavement. She could feel the road was still straight, even though her eyes insisted it was curving sharply. She kept her wheel steady, kept her speed constant. The car shuddered. Things scraped along the sides, whether real or imagined, Rebecca couldn't tell. Voices screamed in her ears, hundreds of them, all the loop's victims begging, threatening, pleading. The temperature plummeted, her breath coming out in visible puffs despite the car's heater running at full blast. 5 miles, Morrison shouted. "You're almost here. The lab's shielding should start protecting you any second now." And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The voices cut off. The cold disappeared. The sky returned to its normal afternoon blue. The road was clearly, obviously straight ahead. And in the distance, Rebecca could see a large building with Morrison Temporal Research Institute written across its front. She'd made it. Rebecca pulled into the parking lot, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Dr. Morrison emerged from the building, a woman in her 50s with grey-streaked hair and intense eyes. She rushed to Rebecca's car and opened the door. "Get inside quickly. The shielding only extends so far." They hurried into the building, through multiple doors with strange symbols and equations carved around their frames. With each threshold they crossed, Rebecca felt the pressure ease, the sense of being watched and hunted diminishing. Finally, they reached an inner laboratory filled with equipment Rebecca didn't recognize. Morrison gestured to a chair surrounded by what looked like copper wiring and crystals. "Sit there. It's a temporal isolation chamber. As long as you're in there, the loop can't reach you." Rebecca collapsed into the chair, exhaustion hitting her all at once. "Dr. Reed?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Gone. Absorbed by the loop, I think. He was investigating the secondary anchors when it happened. He must have triggered something. So the loop has him now, another victim. Maybe. Or maybe—" Morrison pulled up a screen showing complex equations and graphs. "Maybe he did it deliberately." "What?" "Reed's final notes suggest he'd discovered something, a way to fight the loop from the inside. If someone was absorbed while carrying specific temporal resonators, they might be able to disrupt the loop's consciousness from within. Reed had been building such devices for months." Rebecca's eyes widened. "He sacrificed himself. He let the loop take him so he could sabotage it from inside. That's my theory. And if I'm right, he's in there right now, fighting. But he can't do it alone. He needs someone on the outside, someone the loop wants badly enough to expose its core structure. Someone like me. Exactly like you. Rebecca, the loop is obsessed with you. It's been hunting you for months, maybe years, if its temporal reach extends as far as I think. You're not just a random victim. You're something special to it, something it needs." "Why? What makes me different?" Morrison pulled up another screen, this one showing Rebecca's family tree going back several generations. "This is why. Your great-great-grandmother Dorothy Chen lived in Lancaster in the 1940s. She disappeared in 1942 from a boarding house on Maple Drive," Rebecca finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw her. During the temporal cascade. She walked through me and I felt her memories." "Then you understand. You're not a random target, Rebecca. You're a descendant of one of the loop's earliest victims. Your bloodline is connected to this anomaly at a fundamental level. The loop isn't hunting you despite who you are. It's hunting you because of who you are." Rebecca felt the weight of this revelation. Her connection to the Harper house, to the loop, to everything that had happened. It wasn't coincidence. It was destiny, or something like it. The loop had been waiting for her, specifically for her, for generations. "So, what do we do?" Rebecca asked. "We use that connection," Morrison said. "The loop wants you badly enough that it'll expose itself to claim you. If we can lure it into a trap, into a controlled environment where its powers are limited, we might be able to sever its connection to our timeline permanently." "How?" Morrison pulled out a device that looked like a modified smartphone. "This is a temporal beacon. It'll amplify your connection to the loop, make you irresistible to it. The loop will manifest here, in this lab, where I have equipment that can contain it. Once it's contained, we flood it with paradoxical temporal signals that should cause it to collapse in on itself. Should. Nothing is certain with Class 5 anomalies, but it's our best option, and if Reed is inside the loop as I suspect, the collapse will free him and everyone else trapped inside." "Or kill them all permanently," Rebecca said. "Or that," Morrison admitted, "but doing nothing means the loop continues to grow, continues to hunt, continues to claim victims. Eventually it could become powerful enough to escape the confines of Maple Drive entirely. It could spread to other locations, other timelines. We'd be looking at a temporal pandemic." Rebecca thought about all the people trapped in the loop. The original Harpers, Dorothy Chen, Dr. Reed, the modern Harpers, Martha Brennan, dozens, maybe hundreds of others, across a century of horror. They deserved freedom, even if that freedom was oblivion. "How do we do this?" Rebecca asked. The preparation took 2 hours. Dr. Morrison set up equipment around the laboratory, temporal dampeners, reality anchors, paradox generators, devices with names Rebecca didn't fully understand. The temporal isolation chamber where Rebecca sat was reinforced, surrounded by copper wiring and crystals arranged in precise geometric patterns. "The loop will manifest as soon as I activate the beacon," Morrison explained. "It'll appear in physical form, trying to reach you. The containment field should hold it, but there's always a chance it'll break through. If that happens, if it touches you, you'll be absorbed instantly." "Comforting," Rebecca said dryly. "I won't lie to you about the danger. This is incredibly risky, But you're also the safest person in the world to attempt this. Your bloodline connection to the loop creates a kind of immunity. It can't absorb you as easily as it can others. You're like a poison to it, desirable but dangerous. How is that possible? Because your great-great-grandmother's absorption created a temporal paradox. If the loop fully absorbs you, it creates a causal loop. You exist because Dorothy existed, but Dorothy only got absorbed because the loop was hunting her bloodline, which only exists because she had children before being taken. The loop can't resolve this paradox without ceasing to exist, so it's caught between wanting you and fearing you. Rebecca tried to wrap her mind around this. So I'm both bait and poison. Exactly. We're exploiting that contradiction. When the loop tries to take you and realizes it can't, that moment of confusion is when we strike. The paradox generators will amplify the contradiction, feeding it back into the loop's consciousness until the whole structure collapses. And everyone inside will be freed, I hope. Morrison's expression showed her uncertainty. Rebecca, I need you to understand. This is experimental. I've never done anything like this before. The theory is sound, but theory and practice don't always align with temporal anomalies. I understand. Let's do it. Morrison handed Rebecca the temporal beacon. It was warm to the touch, almost alive. When I tell you, activate it. Press the center button and hold it for 10 seconds. That'll send the signal. Then get ready for whatever comes. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. Morrison moved to her control station, fingers flying over keyboards, activating equipment. The laboratory hummed with power, the air itself seeming to vibrate. Ready? Morrison asked. Ready. Activate the beacon, now. Rebecca pressed the center button. The device lit up, pulsing with an eerie blue light. She held it for 1 second, 2, 3. The lights in the laboratory flickered. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. And then, with a sound like reality tearing, it appeared. The Harper house materialized in the center of the laboratory, impossible and undeniable. Not a projection or illusion, but the actual physical structure, transported through space and time to stand inside Morrison's lab. It was bigger on the inside than the lab's dimensions should allow, occupying space that shouldn't exist. The front door opened. Michael and Elizabeth Harper stepped out, smiling their frozen smiles. But they weren't alone. Behind them came dozens more. All the iterations, all the absorbed victims, all wearing the faces of the Harpers, but with subtle differences. An army of echoes, all moving in perfect synchronization. Rebecca, they said in unison, hundreds of voices blending into one. We've come for you. We've waited so long. Come home. Come home to us. Morrison activated the containment field. Brilliant blue light erupted from the copper wiring, forming a dome around the manifested house. The Harpers hit the barrier and stopped, unable to pass through. It's working, Morrison shouted. The field is holding. But the loop wasn't done. The house began to change, cycling through its various forms, the modern structure, the 1970s version, the original boarding house from the 1940s. With each transformation, it pushed against the containment field, testing for weaknesses. Rebecca, I need you to move closer, Morrison called. The beacon needs to be right at the edge of the field. That's where the contradiction will be strongest. Rebecca stood, her legs shaking, and moved toward the edge of the isolation chamber. The temporal beacon pulsed in her hand, its light growing brighter. The Harpers pressed against the containment field, reaching for her with hundreds of hands. That's it, they said. Come closer. Join your family. Dorothy is here. She's been waiting for you. Don't you want to see your great-great-grandmother? And impossibly, horribly, Dorothy Chen appeared among the Harpers. She looked exactly as she had in Rebecca's vision, young, confused, trapped in that moment of her disappearance 80 years ago. She reached out with a desperate expression. Rebecca, Dorothy said, her voice echoing across decades. Please, end this. Free us all. Don't listen, Morrison shouted. It's using her to manipulate you. But Rebecca knew somehow that this really was Dorothy. Not a construct or an illusion, but her actual ancestor, trapped for 8 decades in temporal purgatory. And she was begging for release. I know, Rebecca said softly to Morrison, but she's right. This has to end. Rebecca moved to the very edge of the isolation chamber, holding the temporal beacon forward until it almost touched the containment field. The Harpers surged forward, pressing against the barrier, their hands inches from the beacon. "Now!" Morrison shouted. "Touch the field!" Rebecca pressed the beacon against the containment field. For one moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The contradiction hit the loop like a hammer. Rebecca Chen existed. Therefore Dorothy Chen must have survived to have children. Therefore Dorothy Chen couldn't be absorbed. Therefore the loop couldn't have Dorothy Chen. Therefore the loop's history was impossible. Therefore the loop was impossible. Therefore, the paradox cascaded through the loop's consciousness like a virus, multiplying, spreading, corrupting every iteration. The Harpers began to flicker, their forms becoming unstable. The house shifted faster and faster between its various forms, unable to maintain consistency. "It's working!" Morrison cried. "The loop is destabilizing." But it wasn't going quietly. As the paradox tore through its structure, the loop lashed out. The containment field cracked. The copper wiring began to melt. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around the laboratory, and then the house exploded outward, the containment field shattering. The Harpers poured toward Rebecca like a flood, hundreds of hands reaching, grabbing, pulling. Rebecca felt them touch her, felt that horrible cold that meant absorption, felt herself being pulled into the loop. But something was different this time. The paradox was protecting her, creating a barrier even as the loop tried to consume her. She was inside the loop, but not of it, experiencing its consciousness without being absorbed into it. And what she experienced was beyond horror. She felt every victim's final moments simultaneously, every disappearance, every absorption, every soul trapped in temporal stasis. She felt their fear, their confusion, their eternal suffering. She felt the loop itself, not evil, but hunger. An endless, mindless hunger, born from the original temporal fissure, growing and evolving but never truly alive, never truly conscious. Just an echo of trauma repeated so many times it had taken on a semblance of life. And she felt Dr. Reed. He was in there fighting, his consciousness merged with the loop structure but not absorbed. He'd done exactly what Morrison theorized, allowed himself to be taken while carrying temporal resonators that protected his identity, and now he was a virus in the system, corrupting it from within. "Rebecca," Reed's thoughts touched hers. "You made it. I knew you would. Now finish it. Collapse the loop. Free everyone." "But if I do, you'll die," Rebecca thought back. "Everyone inside will die." "We're already dead," Reed responded. "We died the moment we were absorbed. What we are now isn't life, it's a recording playing on an endless loop. Death would be mercy. Please, Rebecca, end this." Rebecca felt tears on her face. She looked at the temporal beacon in her hand, still pulsing with blue light. All she had to do was crush it. The resulting temporal feedback would finish what the paradox started, collapsing the loop entirely. But that meant killing everyone inside. Killing Reed, Dorothy, the original Harpers, the modern Harpers, Martha Brennan, everyone. Erasing them from existence as if they'd never been. "Do it." Dorothy's thoughts joined Reed's. "Please, granddaughter, I've been trapped here for 80 years. I'm so tired. We're all so tired. Let us rest." Other voices joined in, hundreds of them, all the victims begging for release. They didn't want to exist like this anymore. They wanted an end, even if that end was oblivion. Rebecca looked at Dr. Morrison, who was watching from behind what was left of her equipment. Morrison nodded slowly. She understood. This was the only way. "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered. Then she crushed the temporal beacon in her fist. The device exploded with light and sound, and something beyond both. The paradox amplified 1,000-fold, feeding back into the loop with devastating effect. The loop tried to resist, tried to maintain coherence, but it couldn't. The contradiction was too fundamental, too deep. It was trying to exist and not exist simultaneously, and reality couldn't accommodate that impossibility. The Harper house began to fade, becoming transparent, unreal. The hundreds of Harper iterations dissolved like mist. Rebecca felt the consciousness of everyone inside the loop, felt their relief, their gratitude, their final moments of true awareness before oblivion claimed them. "Thank you." Reed's last thought reached her. "Sarah is waiting for me. I can see her now. Tell Morrison. Tell her she was right about everything. And tell her I'm proud of the work we did together." Then he was gone. They were all gone. The loop collapsed in on itself with a sound like the universe sighing, a release of tension that had been building for over a century. The Harper house vanished completely. The temporal energy that had sustained the loop dissipated into nothing, and Rebecca found herself standing in Morrison's laboratory, which now looked like it had been hit by a bomb. Equipment was destroyed, wiring melted, crystals shattered, but the loop was gone. Truly, finally gone. Rebecca collapsed, exhaustion and grief overwhelming her. Morrison rushed over, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did it take you?" "I'm fine," Rebecca said through tears, "but they're all gone. Everyone who was trapped. I killed them all." "You freed them," Morrison corrected gently. "There's a difference." "Is there? They're still dead. Reed is still dead. Dorothy is still dead. All of them gone forever. But no longer suffering, no longer trapped. Rebecca, you gave them what they wanted most. An ending. That's not murder, that's mercy." Rebecca knew Morrison was right, but it didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. She'd held the power of life and death in her hand, and she'd chosen death. Even if it was the right choice, even if it was what the victims wanted, she'd still made that choice. She'd still crushed that beacon, knowing what would happen. Morrison helped Rebecca to her feet. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere you can rest. We'll deal with the aftermath later." But as they moved toward the door, Rebecca felt something, a warmth in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a small object, a simple copper bracelet, engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Morrison examined it, her eyes widening. "Those are temporal stabilization symbols. Rebecca, this is one of Reed's resonators, the devices he carried into the loop. But how did it get in your pocket?" "He gave it to me," Rebecca realized. "In that final moment before the collapse, he transferred it to me somehow. But why?" Morrison studied the bracelet more closely. "These symbols, they're not just for stabilization, they're for protection. Rebecca, I think Reed knew what would happen. I think he knew the loop would eventually evolve, potentially fragment into smaller anomalies. This bracelet will protect you from temporal manipulation." "You mean there could be more? More loops? More temporal anomalies?" The Harper loop was over a century old and had grown to Class 5 status. It's possible it spawned derivative anomalies before we collapsed it. Temporal offspring, if you will. This bracelet will keep you safe from them. Morrison smiled sadly. "It's Reed's final gift to you. His way of making sure you survive whatever comes next." Rebecca put on the bracelet, feeling it settle around her wrist like a promise. Reed had protected her, even in his final moments. Had made sure she wouldn't face any future threats alone. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air, hoping somehow Reed could hear her. "Thank you for everything." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in front of 1247 Maple Drive with a for sale sign in her hand. It was time to move on. She'd tried to stay, tried to reclaim her life in that house, but the memories were too strong. Every room reminded her of those terrible months. The siege, the loop, the final collapse. The Harper house next door was gone, truly gone this time. After the loop collapsed, the physical structure had somehow degraded impossibly fast, as if a century of neglect had caught up with it in mere weeks. The city had condemned and demolished it, and now only an empty lot remained. A memorial plaque had been placed there, listing the names of everyone known to have disappeared from that location over the past 100 years. Rebecca read the names sometimes. Dorothy Chen, 1942. Michael and Elizabeth Harper, 1975. Michael and Elizabeth Harper, 2005. A different couple, absorbed by the loop before Rebecca ever moved in. Thomas Chen, Martha Brennan, and dozens of others, their names finally acknowledged, their disappearances finally explained, even if the official explanation was simply presumed dead. Dr. Marcus Reed's name was on that plaque too. Hero and victim, researcher and sacrifice. Morrison had made sure his role in ending the loop was documented, at least among the small community of temporal researchers who believed such things were possible. Rebecca had stayed in touch with Dr. Morrison. The older woman called every few weeks to check on her, to make sure no derivative anomalies had manifested. So far, Reed's bracelet seemed to be working. Rebecca felt no traces of temporal manipulation, no sense of being watched or hunted. The loop was truly gone. Tom and Barbara Johnson had moved away too, finally free from decades of living in fear. They'd sent Rebecca a card from Arizona, where they'd retired to be near their grandchildren. "Thank you for ending our nightmare," Barbara had written. "You're braver than anyone we've ever known." Maya visited often, helping Rebecca pack up her belongings and prepare for the move. They'd grown even closer after the loop's collapse, the shared understanding of what Rebecca had experienced, creating a bond that couldn't be broken. "Where will you go?" Maya asked as they taped up boxes in the living room. "I don't know yet," Rebecca admitted. "Somewhere without history, somewhere new." "Everywhere has history," Maya pointed out. "You can't escape the past. You can only choose how you deal with it." "Then I'll choose to deal with it far away from here." As they worked, Rebecca felt the copper bracelet warm against her wrist. She'd grown used to its presence, the subtle way it hummed when temporal anomalies were near. It had activated a few times over the past 6 months, minor fluctuations, nothing serious. But each time Rebecca felt grateful for Reed's foresight, his final act of protection. The doorbell rang. Rebecca opened it to find a young couple standing on her porch, holding hands and looking excited. "Hi," the woman said brightly. "We saw your house is going on the market. Would it be possible to see inside? We're looking in this neighborhood, and your place is exactly what we want." Rebecca hesitated. Should she tell them about the house's history, about the loop that had terrorized this address for over a century, about the nightmares and the horror and the impossible things that had happened here? But then she noticed the bracelet wasn't warm, no temporal anomalies, no lingering threats. The loop was truly gone, and this was just a house now, a normal house where normal people could live normal lives. "Of course," Rebecca said, stepping aside. "Come in. I'll show you around." As the couple explored her home, exclaiming over the hardwood floors and the updated kitchen, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Maybe this house's story could have a happy ending after all. Maybe the next family to live here would experience only normal suburban life, barbecues and birthday parties and lazy Sunday mornings. Maybe the cycle of trauma had finally ended. After the couple left, promising to contact their realtor immediately, Rebecca sat on her front porch one last time, looking at the empty lot where the Harper house had stood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful. "We did it, Reed," Rebecca said softly. "We broke the loop, freed everyone trapped inside, ended a century of horror. I hope you found peace. I hope you're with Sarah now, wherever you are." The copper bracelet warmed slightly against her wrist. Not a warning, but something else. A response, maybe, or just her imagination. But Rebecca chose to believe it was Reed, acknowledging her words, letting her know he was at peace. She sat there until the sun fully set, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow she'd continue packing. Next week she'd move away and start over somewhere new. But tonight she allowed herself this moment of quiet reflection. She'd survived the impossible. She'd faced temporal horrors beyond comprehension and emerged victorious. She'd made the hardest choice of her life and lived with the consequences. And somehow, despite everything, she was still here. Still standing. Still moving forward. As Rebecca stood to go inside, something caught her eye. A flicker of movement in the empty lot next door. She turned sharply, her hand instinctively going to the bracelet, but it was just a deer wandering through where the Harper house once stood. The animal paused, looked at Rebecca with its large dark eyes, then continued on its way, disappearing into the woods beyond. Nature was reclaiming the space. Grass was already growing over the bare earth where the foundation had been removed. In a few years, no one would know a house had ever stood there. The physical evidence of a century of horror would be completely erased, but Rebecca would remember. She would carry these memories forever, along with the weight of the choice she'd made, the lives she'd ended to end the suffering, the souls she'd released into oblivion. She touched the bracelet one more time, feeling its reassuring warmth, and whispered a final goodbye to everyone she'd lost. Reed, Dorothy, the Harpers, all the victims. Then she went inside, locked her door, and began preparing for the future. The nightmare on Maple Drive was finally over, or so she thought. 3 weeks later, Rebecca woke in her new apartment in Baltimore to find a small package on her doorstep. No return address, no postage, just her name written in neat, precise handwriting on plain brown paper. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photograph, old, faded, dated 1942. It showed a group of people standing in front of a boarding house, and there, in the back row, barely visible, stood a man and woman who looked remarkably familiar. Michael and Elizabeth Harper. But that was impossible. The original Harpers had disappeared in 1975, 33 years after this photo was taken. They couldn't have been at that boarding house in 1942, unless the loop had existed even longer than anyone realized. Unless the Harpers had been part of it from the very beginning, cycling through time, appearing in different eras, different iterations, always the same couple with the same names, trapped in an even larger pattern than Morrison or Reed had ever discovered. Rebecca turned the photograph over. On the back, in that same neat handwriting, was a message. The loop remembers. Time heals all wounds, but some scars run deeper than time itself. Thank you for trying. But some things cannot be destroyed, only postponed. We'll see you again when the moment is right, when the cycle completes, when the anniversary comes, April 15th, 2035. 10 years from now, we'll be waiting. Love, your neighbors. Rebecca's blood ran cold. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt hot, burning against her skin. She looked at it and saw the symbols glowing faintly red. A warning. Temporal anomaly detected. But not here. Not now. The bracelet was detecting something 10 years in the future, a temporal echo rippling backward through time to this moment. The loop hadn't been destroyed. It had been delayed, pushed forward 10 years, giving itself time to regenerate, to rebuild, to prepare. And it was coming for her. In exactly 10 years, on April 15th, 2035, the Harper loop would return. Stronger, smarter, evolved from its defeat. It had learned from its mistakes, and it would be ready. Rebecca grabbed her phone and called Dr. Morrison. The call went to voicemail. She tried again. Still voicemail. A text message appeared on her screen. Dr. Sarah Morrison's office will be closed until further notice, due to a temporal research emergency. If this is urgent, please contact... The message cut off. Rebecca tried calling again, but the number was now disconnected. She was alone. Just her, the bracelet, and a warning from 10 years in the future. Rebecca looked at the photograph again, studying the faces of the people in that 1942 image. How many of them had been absorbed by the loop? How many had become iterations of the Harpers, trapped in temporal stasis, cycling through decades? And more importantly, how many more loops were out there? How many other temporal anomalies existed in other places, other houses, other cursed locations? Had destroying the Harper loop somehow alerted them all to her existence? Had she made herself a target for every temporal predator in existence? The bracelet pulsed against her wrist, its warmth, both comforting and terrifying. Reed had given her protection, but protection implied there was something to be protected from. Something coming, something inevitable. Rebecca set the photograph on her kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. She had 10 years. 10 years to prepare, to research, to figure out how to truly destroy the loop when it returned. 10 years to become strong enough, knowledgeable enough, prepared enough to face it again. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. If the loop was coming for her in 2035, she'd be ready. She'd learn everything there was to know about temporal anomalies. She'd contact every researcher, every expert, every person who'd ever experienced something similar. She'd build weapons, defenses, strategies. And when April 15th, 2035 arrived, when the Harpers knocked on her door with their frozen smiles and their welcoming gifts, Rebecca Chen would be ready, because some nightmares don't end when you wake up. Some nightmares wait patiently in the darkness, counting down the days until they can return, and the worst nightmares always keep their promises. Rebecca picked up the photograph one last time, studying those familiar faces from 1942. 10 years, she said aloud. I'll see you in 10 years, and this time I won't just break the loop. I'll erase it from existence completely. I'll make sure you can never hurt anyone ever again. The bracelet pulsed in response. Agreement, acknowledgement, or perhaps just a reminder that the clock was already ticking. April 15th, 2035. The countdown had begun. Rebecca set the photograph down and opened her laptop. If she only had 10 years, she couldn't waste a single day. She started searching for other temporal researchers, for similar cases, for anyone who might have information about loops that survive destruction. Her first search result made her pause. Temporal Anomaly Support Group. First meeting tonight, Philadelphia. The meeting was in 3 hours. Rebecca looked at the address and felt the bracelet warm again. Not a warning this time, an encouragement. This was where she needed to be. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. The nightmare might not be over, but she refused to face it alone. If there were others out there who'd experienced similar horrors, who'd survived their own temporal loops, she'd find them. And together, they'd be ready when the Harpers returned. Because Rebecca Chen was no longer just a victim, no longer just a survivor. She was a temporal anomaly hunter now, and she had 10 years to get very, very good at her new job. The story of the couple who disappeared 10 years ago was far from over, but this time when they knocked on Rebecca's door, she'd be the one who was ready. She'd be the one who was waiting. She'd be the one who would end this nightmare once and for all. Or die trying. The end. Or is it just the beginning? Author's note. If you've experienced anything similar to what Rebecca went through, if you've lived next to a house that felt wrong, if you've seen figures that shouldn't exist, document everything. Tell someone. Don't face it alone. Temporal loops are rare, but they're real, and they're always looking for their next victim. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and never ever accept a casserole from neighbors you don't remember moving in. The loop is always watching. The loop is always waiting. The loop never forgets, and sometimes the loop comes back. The couple next door disappeared 10 years ago. They just knocked on my door.